Welcome to this complete game commentary on Spellforce 3 Reforced. Here's the short comment before we get started. For a game I'd never heard of, seems to have no impact, and generally gave me this B-tier vibe from the outside. It's actually jam-packed with quality. It's a game that features real-time strategy battles, but also old-school CRPG-style adventuring, and probably the fact that it does both in a way that, despite the claims of their advertising, isn't very seamless or integrated in my opinion, is going to be the cause of what someone might not like about it, even though it's a perfectly good Warcraft-like RTS game, and a perfectly good Baldur's Gate-like RPG. So in this video I'll be going through my campaign, talking about what happened, snarking at it probably, and giving my general thoughts on anything I deem important enough to mention. Take a look at the length of the video for a clue as to how low my bar for important enough to mention will be. Make your bed, lie in it, and let's get started. I'll only vaguely cover the plot of the game for context in this commentary, but before I get into sarcastically summarizing things or something, I did want to say that I found the plot and its delivery to actually be outrageously good, but for a single omnipresent feature that will become clear as we go on. The top-down summary to understand this game's world is, it's The Witcher 3, but it's an RTS, and more high fantasy as well, but loads of specific design elements and plot features are Witcher 3-ish to me. Reinforced, or reforced you might say, by the fact that a key character in the Prologue plot is voiced by the Geralt guy doing his Geralt voice.
He's more than just an ordinary lawbreaker. He's a traitor, he's a mage, and he's a murderer.
Yes, it's not his real voice, so we had the option of not making this guy sound exactly like Geralt, but of course that would be the wrong call. On the voice acting, I'm going to make a bold claim. This game is among the best voice-acted games ever made. That's my claim. The voice acting standard is absolutely through the roof for some reason. Not only is everyone packed with character, not necessarily like reading the lines straight up or accurately in order to enhance that character, but the naturalism in the voices is what sells it for me. To put this another way, this ain't your voice actors guild style voice acting, where the voicing very much has a style. If like anime dub voice acting is one end of the stylized voices spectrum, this is the other end, the realistic voices end, with like movies and stuff being somewhere in the middle.
Anselm!
Sir?
Get a healer in here to take care of your sister.
She's dead, sir.
And get a mage. Maybe he can track where that portal led. Wait.
General?
What?
I think this one is still alive.
Wonderful. A treacherous traitor.
General Noria saved you and took you under his wing. Despite the Mage Wars being over, disquieting developments are taking place, backed by the common folk. A cult called the Purity of Light has risen.
I have the voices turned down in all my footage, so it's probably not that clear. Therefore, I wanted to make this huge claim and then provide no evidence for it for the remainder of the video, and this probably won't come up again. I really liked every aspect of the sound to this game, especially the way the characters are played, and I thought it was distinctly natural compared to the majority of more stylized character voicing you usually get. It does suffer from a lack of actors, in that the same voice is used for many people here and there, but it's nowhere near as egregious as, say, Skyrim, so I'll give them a pass. Now, what's happening in this prologue to Spellforce 3 Reforced, and what does Reforced even mean? Well, we'll get to that later probably. We're here learning how our daddy was a very bad man. Short version is that Daddy got a bunch of the feudal lords to back a rebellion against the crown. What feudal lords, what crown? Well, there's a generic medieval fantasy setting, that's all you need to know really. But the kicker was that this guy, Asamo Tahar, Daddy, was a serious mage, and this rebellion was generally themed around mages, with a lot of magic being used in battle. This is mainly important because in the setting of the game, magic is either frowned upon or banned, and it's because of this magic-fueled rebellion in recent history. I'm not sure, but this backstory might actually be the front story of previous Spellforce games, for all I know. I think they are all covering the same period. I even think, in my deepest memory, that some characters from previous games are in this one. Or maybe this is a prequel, I don't know. I have actually played Spellforce 2, and I think, although I'm not sure about this, I've played Spellforce 1 as well. It was a very long time ago, and I remember literally nothing other than how good the music was. So let's see if Spellforce 3 can do any better than that. Sometime after all that drama, we're playing as the son of the rebel leader, who was rescued from execution in that prologue because you rebelled against the rebellion, and hence you're, in okayish terms, in the Crown's eyes, and you ended up being a high-ranking soldier. You're called a corporal by others, but the context, like in-universe, implies that this is a rank only slightly below general. In practice, you act as a high-ranking military commander with vast experience, and many armies will happily follow your orders just based on hearing your name alone. So that's going to be the basis for the RTS segments of the game later on. First though, we're in RPG mode, and we encounter the first big problem with the game early on the streets of the capital, where you can talk to this preacher from the Purity, who are essentially the villains of the game. These guys ultra hate mages and magic, and they're going around using some procedure that removes magical abilities from people and or zombifies / kills them. Basically, what if Dragon Age Origins was an RTS? The whole Baldur's Gate-like RPG setting really is a surprisingly narrow narrative genre, it seems. The Purity are sort of the new official religion of your kingdom. So they're out there doing these things, and it's all legal and such, and we'll be having to deal with their increasingly genocidal antics throughout the game. But what made me mad was that my character is a mage, and you can use magic in the street in front of these Purity guys, and nothing happens. I think magic is even illegal already in the story, so it should annoy the guards and the soldiers too. The basic background to this whole Purity thing is that there is a prophecy of some kind, which is that if all magic users, quote-unquote defilers as they're called, were removed from reality and we stopped using magic, then God would come back. Basically, God has abandoned this universe, but he might come back if we stop playing God ourselves. That's the idea anyway. So that's why everybody hates magic all of a sudden. This belief has spread very far and wide. But it does create that special game commentary word, which we're all waiting for me to say, a ludo-narrative dissonance. Because yes, you don't feel that magic is illegal or frowned upon in any way. It's an immersion breaker. It was an immersion breaker for me, at least, to have this early conversation where you learn about all of this stuff, and then you just do magic in front of the guy and nothing happens. It's there needs to be something in the gameplay that links up with that part of the lore. You need to feel that using magic is wrong or frowned upon, or struggle to use it in some way, and then have it be powerful in exchange. So I had that issue early on, and really this is just opening the door to complaints about a lack of player agency in general in the story. You are given lots of choices, but I'm not sure they ever matter. Sometimes they matter a very small amount, and I suppose we'll get to that as they become more relevant. But yes, you are just here for the ride, really. You don't want to get too immersed in the sort of role-playing aspect of the role-playing side of the game. It's more like a CRPG-style visual novel. And I think if you dig down, you'll find a lot of CRPGs are actually a CRPG-style visual novel in some way, because making it a real role-playing game is really difficult. It gets exponentially difficult very quickly. Well, anyway, we'll have more on that in a bit. There is this really cool and immersive explore the city part with various lore things and setting things to absorb. It's all very nice. And by the way, while I'm going to be flippant and annoying about all of the lore and the story and the general way the game portrays itself, in the moment of playing, I was actually paying attention, and I thought it was rather good. Just to clear all of that up before I proceed to spend hours talking about how it's bad, of course. At some point, General Geralt takes us out on a mission with our little Special Forces team, because we're an elite soldier or something, or a Lieutenant General equivalent sort of guy, in which we need to investigate a mysterious disease known as the Bloodburn, which is affecting a village somewhere in the kingdom, and several others, I guess, as well. This begins one of the many RPG adventure combat sections where you maraud around a map with your party, fighting mobs and collecting teeth and pelts. Just your standard medieval RPG stuff, basically. There are side quests to kill 3 goblins or whatever, all the good stuff. I think I won't really mention the majority of this to save time, because you can probably imagine what I'm talking about. And really the difficult part of the game isn't this part, as we'll soon see. There are many maps where you can wander around, fighting and looting, gaining EXP, and helping villagers do things. These side quests are decent enough, and they're all really well voiced, as ranted about before. The real joy, though, is just the combat that happens, because I really like how they've implemented the so-called click and fight system. This is a radial wheel, to which you assign all your various hero abilities, and you use them in a way that's easier than hotkeying them IMO. This will be clearer later when we have more abilities to play with, so let's just keep speeding through. Really, this part of the game is still the tutorial or prologue. Our real adventure is yet to begin. We arrive at the plagued village only to find it's been locked down by an army of disgusting elves. Yes, we've got what I guess is now the usual portrayal of elves, in which they are a hated, outcast society, permanent refugees, and such. Dragon Age got 'em, Witcher got 'em, so you know this Dragon Age Witcher RTS has also got 'em. Their leader explains that even though there is a treaty between humans and elves to play nice, they're going to stop us going into this village by force, because, quote-unquote, they know what we're doing. A statement which will become clearer in a moment. So, General Geralt's like, okay, I guess we're breaking the treaty then, and we declare war on them. Hence starts the first proper RTS segment of the game. It's a pretty normal RTS we've got right here. Firstly, the map is divided into sectors, each with its own town centre-like building, which automatically makes villages. You set down resource collection buildings to get resources, and then unit buildings to make your army. The main way this intersects with the RPG gameplay is that only your story characters can capture new sectors and thus allow you to build things. This means no matter what you do with your army, it's your heroes that actually make the progress. So the meta will be get as many sectors as you can early on, make an army up to the pop cap, and then attack move towards the enemy. You can micro much more than that, especially when using your heroes in battle, because all of the micro from the RPG section of the game comes into RTS just on top of everything else. But to begin with, I wasn't really on top of all that. In fact, I wasn't really on top of anything, because one thing the game doesn't really do is give you time to look at any unit descriptions and such. The RTS match just starts suddenly, and if you want to sit there learning about things, you're already in trouble, because it's a very high pressure, high APM RTS, which is where I feel this sort of dissonance with the rest of the game, or it feels a bit weird. I'll need some time to explain what exactly I'm getting at here, and this first stage is the worst example of what I mean, so I think I'll save this rant for later. What I will say is that when I wanted to state originally my summary of my thoughts about the RTS gameplay just now, there was only one word that came to mind, and it was difficult. In the RPG portions of the game, it's really chill, and I could get away with barely paying attention, but in the RTS segments, I was like giving it everything I had and was still falling behind and missing things constantly. So that's the summary, and neither side of that coin is bad unto itself. It was just strange to go from one to the other, and it got to the point when I was kind of dreading the RTS segments, because they're essentially the bosses of the game, the big difficulty spikes, very high stress that put you under a lot of pressure. Again, we'll just have to see this later. I'll mention I am playing on hard difficulty, and I have literally no idea what that does. The old classic, meaning according to the OffyD grand theory of difficulty, that this must be a bad game. This is another case where the attention to detail is so great that my usual trick of extrapolating a lack of attention to detail from poor difficulty implementation might not work. Well, we'll have to see, and maybe we'll also see the actual difficulty I'm referring to if you're very lucky. For this first stage, the enemy only put a little pressure on me, so I was able to defend with a few units and heroes, while building a large army, which eventually attack moves forward, and everything was good. The army itself is basically just melee guys and ranged guys mixed together, which is another RTS thing where it gives you this choice, but the ranged guys are the correct option, because their DPS is much higher in practice, but their cost isn't, which just always seems to happen in these games, because the AI for controlling ranged units is so much easier to make that they always perform better in a way that's probably not been factored into their build cost. Basically 5 crossbowmen will kill your heroes instantly, whereas like you can tank entire armies of zombies and swordsmen and such just fine. It's that kind of setup. Again, if you're very lucky, I might even show you this later on. We push through and win this simple first stage, although there is a little twist. After you capture the village, there is a new elf army that spawns on the opposite side of the map, right next to your base, so I had to rush back there quickly. Handily, I had built a load of towers in the base, so we have some protection. And also losing ground at this stage doesn't really matter. The only big thing is we have to protect the town centre or town centre-like building of the other races, as we'll see in the future, because if you lose that, you lose the entire match. Not that that attack there really threatened us that much. It should be noted that me making those towers is a bad idea to some extent, because making towers means that you're not using villagers as efficiently as they could be, or workers as they're actually called, meaning you can't have defences and economy. To put that another way, your towers require workers to function, and those workers could be doing something else. Instead, they're sitting in their towers, mostly doing nothing at all, so it's all just lost potential if you try to set up towers and you're not literally constantly firing from them. So, you can get around this by using a system the game explicitly tells you to use, but I actually didn't really, which is switching workers between buildings. You can unassign workers from buildings and reassign them to other things. So it's fine to make empty towers, that's not a problem, and then send the workers there when you get attacked. That's incredibly difficult to do because you'd have to pay a lot of attention and not be microing something else, and that is essentially the reason why I didn't do it. I was always doing something else, to the extent like I never had any free time during the RTS segments to go and play around with the workers back in the base or anything like that, so I tended to just leave them all on whatever the default setup was and hope it was fine, even though the game in the tutorial tells you about doing this and tells you you are supposed to do it. So I'm trying to give the game some credit here. It's not that it was withholding this vital information from you or anything, I just couldn't take it in all at once, it was all too much. Don't let this apparent easy victory of mine fool you. I've already, quote-unquote, learned it wrong, and I'll have to be beaten into shape by the rest of the campaign. As usual, every frame of gameplay where it's going well, that's because I'm skilled. Every frame of gameplay that's going poorly, that is because somebody else has made a mistake and it's not my fault. I think we all agree that that is the case, and we also all agree that if I'm going to complain about the game being hard, it's not because I put the game on hard difficulty. Let's hand wave that away as well. I genuinely don't know what it does, so there is actually a point to be made there. You could be like, well, you're saying it's hard, but you did put it on hard mode, but I can shoot back and say, yeah, but it didn't say what was hard about it, and I have no idea if the things that I think are hard about this game are actually related to the difficulty settings at all. And I shouldn't have no idea. That's like the only point to be made. A bit of text on a screen somewhere would probably solve quite a lot. It's that old really annoying game design comment. Oh well. With that rant, which only foreshadows and promises future rants, now complete, let's see what's happening. One of the wounded elves from the battle told us that the reason they put up a fight is that a spy told them that General Geralt is planning to execute the local population in order to stop the spread of this disease. However, the elves happen to know that this disease is actually a curse of some kind, such that killing people doesn't prevent its spread. So they were being nice guys, although I don't remember why they couldn't tell us that before, or send a letter or something if they really wanted to avoid this trouble. Well, armed with this knowledge, we go and tell the rest of our officer team that Geralt's secret plan isn't going to work and maybe we should stop it. However, we are waylaid by another plot element. One of our fellow officers, Anselm, happens to passionately hate our guts. This is because his sister was killed by our father back in the war. We actually saw this back in the prologue, and we saw that it happened because his sister Leroy Jenkins'd her way into Asamo Tahar's lair and got killed instantly. The point is, Anselm ultra hates us because our dad killed his sister during an event where he was also trying to kill us, our dad that is. We were being executed for betraying the rebellion, like during that prologue. And Anselm was trying to kill both us and him, and indeed everyone else in the room and within a mile's radius probably. You know, there's a lot of bad blood flying around here, and I don't really think we should be in the same unit with this guy, but after we report that the genocide plan might not work, he reveals we've already secretly been ordered to carry the killings out. So even if we were to believe those filthy, disgusting, never-to-be-trusted elf lies, it is still desertion if we don't go through with it, and he essentially tries to bait us into disobeying the order because he wants to execute us for it, for the aforementioned reasons. This reveals the one other big early disappointment I had with the game. This is the illusion of choice, you might say. You see, if you don't rise to the provocation and you actually agree to carry the killing out, it's not a branching path as it appears and as I originally thought. You just fight Anselm and get branded a traitor anyway. It essentially changes a few dialogues going forward where it lets you claim that Anselm was the real traitor. But the plot cannot change in response to that, because that would be really annoying to develop, wouldn't it? So for one reason or another, the fact the game gives you all these dialogue options made me think it was going to have more paths than it does. For the most part, there is only one through line to follow, in the visual novel style as I put it, and this moment was when I started to realise that that's how it's gonna be, as it really felt like the game was setting up for some moral choice, where you could kill the civilians to prove your loyalty and perhaps earn trust for your new Bloodburn intel or something like that. It was like a sigh-inducing surprise to see the dialogue and plot doing acrobatics to make each branch of the choice it gives you always lead back to the main choice you are quote-unquote supposed to make. I probably won't point it out more, but there are millions of cases in the game where you get options to agree or disagree to do something, and then whichever one you choose, the game forces the correct option upon you. You know, lots of games do this, you've probably seen it before. The classic case is when you're talking to a somewhat hostile NPC, the game will usually give you the option of whether to fight them or talk it out, and if you talk it out, the route virtually always ends in the NPC being like, "Well, I've considered your erudite arguments and witty quips, and upon rational consideration, I'm going to fight you anyway," and you end up like back where the branching path started, essentially. The real point is that this isn't your story in the role-playing sense. The role-playing and choices are mainly technical, in that they revolve around your character's builds. And my builds, actually, in this particular scene, aren't very good, because you can see I chose to go for an archer build, but the other character the game gives you is also an archer build, so like we're really badly set up for fights, and we actually struggle a bit in this fight against the Anselm boss. Luckily, we exploit the AI and like fight these guys one at a time somehow, so it goes fine. The long and short of this betrayal of ours is that no one believes those elf lies we were spouting, and a judge sentences us to death for cavorting with the enemy and being caught knee-deep in the body parts of allied troops. At first, it looks like you're going to need to craftily escape by using an old nail you find after fighting a spider in there or something, but actually, it's time to open up the wardrobe and don our plot armor, for this is where the story actually begins, when we are visited in our cell by the realm's high priest, who has every intention of letting us go, because we are, as it turns out, and genuinely unexpectedly for such a down-to-earth and normal-seeming protagonist, the Chosen One. That's a nice argument, Cardinal. Why don't you try backing it up with a source? I say, his source is that he made it No, he says it came to him in a dream. We can save the world from Bloodburn, somehow, and it specifically has to be me and the woman in the next cell. It's God's will, and we need to do what God says because the church is trying to get him to come back, as previously mentioned. So if we promise to go and find a cure for the Bloodburn somehow, perhaps using our tip from the elves that it's actually a magical effect rather than a disease, as people seem to think, he will just let us go. Plus, if we agree, we don't get executed. And he isn't going to supervise or monitor whether we're really doing what he wanted at all. It's a pretty good arrangement, and one that might come back to haunt this purity cult later on, being that we are their natural enemy as a mage, and we actually have real plot armor. Yes, the game gives you plot armor explicitly, in that Lycain, the High Priest, gives us a thing that makes you immortal. If you die, you respawn a few seconds later from this point on in the game at the nearest ancient godstone, which are basically every few hundred meters all over the planet. So there you go, like, we are actually the Chosen One because we've got the little badge that says you've been chosen and God will prevent you from dying. Thanks. So now we're the protagonists of the story. Step 1, we need to kill our way out of the city to begin our investigation, just as God intended. In fact, I decided to go out of my way to kill more people than necessary. Hello, algorithm. I also saw that in one part of town they've got this huge sword that's like 5 times the size of a person, surrounded by crabs that look small in comparison to the sword, but they themselves are probably human-sized. Something's going on in the deep lore of this town, but there's no time to consider that any further. Yes, I went past the objective to keep killing soldiers because you get experience points, but more importantly, one thing you quickly learn about this game is that it has these very large and detailed maps, but the main objectives usually only require you to explore a fraction of them. There are, though, loads of things to find stashed around the maps, including these unique crafting parts, which are used to make the best weapons and armor in the game, or at least some very good weapons and armor. The weapons and armor you can get through quests is pretty much as good in my experience, like by the end of the game anyway, so while you sort of should poke around and do everything to get the best party setup, I don't think you actually have to. The game's forgiving enough. If you can't be bothered to do everything and you just do the quests as it tells you to do them, you'll probably be almost as powerful as somebody who 100%s everything. But still, it's fun to poke around and do everything the game has to offer, so generally I will be doing that. And in many cases that means not doing the main quest objective. I'm just taking my time, getting target practice on the cops and stealing anything that looks good. Overall, proving that the High Priest's plan to release a bunch of prisoners was a great idea. You might note we have a load of other prisoners with us too. This was an optional thing. You could open other cells on your way out and get these guys to help you with the fights. You might think you're being a hero or something because they're imprisoned for spurious reasons by this new overzealous purity-based regime. That is the story with our new second party member, Iria, the second chosen one. We'll talk about her more later. For now, you just need to know she's also an archer, thus my choice of being an archer still sucks, and we have no tank in the party, making the combats a bit more annoying, so I have to spend more of my time just constantly healing. Handily, we're both light mages, which allows you to heal. Anyway, I was going to say, all the other people we sprung may or may not be unfairly imprisoned victims of a paranoid regime, or maybe they really were murderers being kept away from the public, but either way, they're murderers now, so all's well that ends well. To escape, we had to go through the castle keep, because there was a secret passage we knew about. You're confronted there by a named character who Tahar knows and sort of attempts to talk to, and I wondered whether there was a way to talk that out, because for me, we just started fighting instantly, but it might have been because I targeted them instantly, thinking they were just more like walking experience points. Maybe I missed something there, or maybe it was an example of a chance for branching paths or different playstyles not being taken up by the game. We do escape easy enough, and several days later, we're somewhere in the countryside, approaching a village that the High Priest Lacane gave us a tip about. Supposedly, someone there will hide us from the cops, and generally help us with our investigation. There's a lead in this area who we'll meet in a second that will help us out. But before that, we've got another adventure RPG segment as we make our way there. There are side quests to do, you've got goblins to fight, shiny things to locate. It's another case where ideally, you want to uncover as much of the map as you can and clear out all the enemies before advancing the main quest, not just for loot and experience points, but because you want the map, or any map, to be as well scouted and safe as possible before any RTS segments come about. Once I reached the village, having not really done the exploration I just said was ideal because I didn't know what I was doing, I used their shop to rebuild Iria into more of a mage, thus saving any bow-based loot for Tahar. As for who Iria is, what I'm going to do in this commentary is attempt to recall from memory what the deal with each character is as we go along, and anyone who knows otherwise, let me know how I did in the comments. With Iria, she's a disgusting, filthy, never-to-be-trusted elf, who I think is a double refugee in that she is outcast from the already outcast main elf community. You do learn why that is, but that was a very long time ago now and I can't actually remember. It was something to do, this is what I do know, something to do with her ex-boyfriend. That's the main thing I've been focusing on, of course. And thinking back to all of the party members I actually bothered to go through the full conversation trees with, there was always some major issue with their ex, and that was their call to adventure. So I think whoever wrote this game had something they wanted to say about their life. Maybe we'll learn more about that later when it actually comes up in the game. Iria was living a life on the road, and during some bout of increasingly standard anti-elf racism, combined with the newfangled anti-magic racism, which is intertwined because all of the elves are a bit magical, like whether they're officially mages or not, she ended up getting attacked by a mob, and she blew their heads off with some magic during the scuffle, leading to her arrest and journey to the cell next to ours. As for why she is also the chosen one alongside you, I don't actually remember. I think Lacane might have just been happy for you to pick who was also the chosen one, effectively for you to pick your party, and you can extend your immortality boon to them as well. And he just wanted you to go on a nice quest, basically, with your friends. He's a really nice guy. As for our main business in the village, we ask after this chap named Iskrim, who according to Lacane knows something about ancient magics and curses on account of being a scholar of such things around these parts. So he might know something about the Bloodburn, basically. The village chief says he is around here, but he's currently being held in captivity by some nearby orcs. Yes, we've got orcs, tick that off your medieval fantasy bingo card. They're orcs of the Warcraft variety, basically, only more well-spoken and clever, despite still, defaulting to solving all their problems by headbutting them. Our plan is to fight off the orcs using the local army, who have reneged from the failing feudal system, and now just fight for some guy instead. There's just a guy standing down the street who is the commander of the local army, and I guess that makes him the ruler or something, who knows. He doesn't think he's the ruler, and he's ambivalent enough about the fact he commands the army to be willing to just give it all to us if we ask about it. He's impressed that we're a corporal or something. This is tying into what I said earlier, that being a corporal is apparently a big deal in this world, and maybe just mentioning it is enough to get yourself made into effectively a feudal lord. Pretty good. Well, anyway, he says if we prove ourselves by killing a few orcs, he'll make us the commander, so that's easy enough, right? Wrong! The immortality came in very useful because the orcs turned out to be strong enough to kill me, or at least kill me given that I only have 2 squishy DPS characters for my party. You can respec a lot of times throughout the game, so the lesson I learnt is that you should have your main character be a paladin type build early on, like light magic and tanking, because the game will give you DPS companions to complement that, so being a DPS yourself doesn't necessarily help all that much. So you could just be a tank for the first few maps and then later respec to be whatever you want to be once you have a bigger and more comprehensive party. If you equip a shield and armor, not only do you take less damage, but you can block damage entirely in some cases. So tanking is a very viable thing to go for. Also, since you're magic, you could probably still deal just as much damage, as a DPS character. The only downside is that using a shield means you have to be a melee fighter, which means more running around and waiting for animations to line up and not actually doing damage, while the ranged characters are just continuously attacking. Well, I guess who needs such strategy? Why are we even discussing this when I have a magic rune that makes me immortal? You do have lives, so to speak, as you can see towards the top right. I can only die twice in quick succession, so if I have 3 hero deaths, one after the other, then it will send you back to the last save instead. That's the game over state. This is one thing I know is easier on the lower difficulty, because I saw in some tutorial image you could have 4 lives, and as far as I know, there's no way to get extra lives through gameplay, so I think that's just difficulty based. After killing those orcs, the commander shrugs his shoulders and walks off. So we're the commander now. I started piecing together some economy while scouting forwards with the heroes, only to find the orcs control pretty much all of the rest of the map already. So there are no early sector steals available. This is an unusual thing. In most stages, if you rush, you can capture the majority of the map before the enemy sets up in it, obviously making things much easier, but for now, we'll have to sit on our 2 sectors and try to make an army. I could push with just the heroes, but I was very hesitant to do so after seeing how easily we die in the previous quest. I mentioned this before, but heroes do really badly against ranged units, and especially against units that are found in the RTS portion of the game. There is a distinction here, as in the RPG segments you fight monsters, spiders, goblins, golems, adventure-y things, and from my experience, they are much weaker than regular units from the main armies you face. Your heroes are glass cannons really, where they'll kill a regular soldier in say 5 hits, but only get 10 hits before they die themselves. So the second you face literally 2 enemies, you need to start thinking carefully. The answer is to use your hero abilities, which massively tip things in your favour. However, in the early game that's not so much of a factor, and with no ability to block attacks thanks to my not very good build as mentioned earlier, all I can do is hope my 2 glass cannons don't break too much. I did a test at one point and I found that a standard infantry unit, even in melee, can kill a melee hero in one-on-one on hard difficulty anyway, presuming that hard difficulty does something where it makes the enemy cheat and secretly have higher stats, something like that. It's probably what's going on in cases like this, which otherwise don't seem to make sense. And a ranged unit can kill you even faster than that, so that thing I mentioned about heroes tanking whole armies earlier, it can happen as we'll see, but it's much more the case in RPG segments. The RTS world is a little more serious, and realistically you have to bring an army to sacrifice so your heroes can survive and thus achieve their true potential by spamming abilities during the battle. Better build an army then, right? I had to rant quite a lot there just to come to that rather banal conclusion, didn't I? I'm going to have to make an army in this RTS game. Oh, maybe that's the right strategy. However, I mentioned before that the enemy actively plays against you, and that's where the difficulty of the RTS portions comes in. In RPG mode, the enemy can't outplay you. In RTS mode, they certainly can. So while I might think I'll make an army before I advance, the enemy is also making an army, and they control more of the map, so they're probably making it faster. We're going to be facing an uphill battle for sure. And indeed, they sent many waves to attack our base. Our outpost buildings shoot arrows, so fighting beside it gives us a marginal advantage. We also have heroes here, and we're closer to our recruitment buildings, so we can feed troops in more easily than the enemy. But the enemy are also feeding more troops in, and they can almost certainly make more of them than us. Plus, while we might have immortal heroes on our side, so do the enemy. The rules are exactly the same for them, meaning they have to use heroes to capture new territory. And imagine my poor, naive self here when I thought, even though this fight's not going that well, we lost a lot of our troops, we did kill a load of orcs, and we isolated their heroes. All I have to do is kill those heroes, and then we can't lose territory, easy. So we kill the heroes, establish a stronger forward position with more unit production, make a blob, and ultimately rush the nearest sector to take it out. We capture it easily, and then I start moving on to the next one. And at this stage, two things were revealed. First, the enemy heroes are also immortal. They just come back when you kill them. Why? I don't know. I guess we're not the only party on a chosen mission from God, as it turns out. I mean, given how easily we stumbled into immortality, it makes sense that other people will have also got their own things going on. Reminds me of the plot of Final Fantasy XIII, like we're the playthings of the gods, we're clashing, trying to carry out mysterious missions, and while distracted thinking about Claire Lightning Farron, my ex-girlfriend, those heroes have led an army through the fog of war and taken back the sector I captured. This is the second thing I learned. The AI is good at making lines of attack along your weak axes and taking you by surprise. Here, I had to split my army into two groups, one defending our base as the orcs pressed the attack deeper, and another one frantically running around trying to avoid any engagement with the main orc army. Yes, they might be using Sun Tzu tactics, but so can I. If an army can't engage, it can't do anything, so a tiny number can defeat a larger number by removing them from play. The essence of tactical kiting. In this case, I'm just pulling things together to fight nearer to my towers and recruitment centers basically. Also, you can get constant health regeneration when standing in your own territory. So broadly speaking, you'd always want a major clash to be on the edge of your territory, but be a defensive battle technically, and then push out immediately after. Anyway, I wanted to praise the AI, as throughout the game, I felt seriously under pressure from their sneaky attacks, and the level of skill the AI plays with is certainly a cut above the usual campaign RTS game, despite this not even being an RTS game. I was just really impressed, and we'll see more and more of that as we go on, of course. My main attack failed because my heroes were killed by a single enemy building here. Outpost buildings can kill heroes really quickly. They do something like 75 to 150 damage, and you probably have about 700 health in the early game, so in practice, you've only got a few seconds of alive time to get out of their range once they aggro onto a hero. You need to notice they're targeting the heroes right away, pretty much. After they die, I quickly realize my attack group doesn't have the damage output to kill this building faster than it's being repaired, and I'm ultimately pushed back, fearing the enemy will come down the middle while I'm away, so I don't want to waste too much time. I should mention that buildings can be repaired extremely quickly, and it takes like a whole pop cap's worth of regular infantry to out-damage a building that's being repaired. You can force a repair to stop by targeting a little worker that appears next to the building while it's being repaired. But this doesn't happen under a fire-at-will regime. Your troops won't just do it if they appear in front of them. So you have to manually intervene to make that happen. But the worker will constantly respawn until the sector runs out of workers. So like they've got 10 to 20 respawns in them, and then they'll keep respawning like every 30 seconds after that, because the sectors continuously spawn new workers for free. The long and short is that without siege weapons, attacking requires overwhelming strength or some heroes who have siege abilities. Siege is a special kind of damage that regular units are strong against but buildings are weak against, essentially. There's also slash, piercing, and magical, but broadly I ignored the other damage distinctions and just treated them equally, which turned out to be fine. After some back and forth, the situation stabilizes and I end up in control of the mission for two main reasons. One, I worked out how to build catapults, which have extreme range and can deal with those pesky buildings. And two, the orcs stopped attacking me, that's nice. The waves coming from their base completely died down and ended up facing groups of like 5 to 10 units for the rest of the battle, and then eventually nothing at all. This is because resources are finite in this game, meaning that even though I felt under pressure the whole time and stressed out by the fact the orcs kept attacking me all over the place, Simply because I was trading well, that does lead to a victory here, and we are left with the army in the field. The stage ends up becoming so peaceful that I was literally able to stop playing the RTS segment and switch back to the RPG side of the map to do more exploration, helped by the fact that you can bring your units to make it easier. I think this is the only map that was easy enough to do this on, unfortunately. Generally speaking, you can't look away from a battle until it's won, as we'll see. Eventually I go over and storm the orc base, finding it mostly empty, and capturing their sectors reveals that they are indeed out of food. So that's why they stopped attacking. Normally, food is the only resource that is actually infinite, so perhaps the game goes easy on you here by stopping the orcs from making any farming buildings, since we're still getting started. That might explain why it was possible to fight to a standstill on this map. But the rest of the game will be a non-stop barrage of spam. At least we're done for now, and we indeed rescue the Dwarven scholar Isgrim. He's looking for the lost city of Mulhandir, and we need to contact him specifically because there was this rumour going around that the Bloodborne curse has something to do with a strange song people sometimes hear in their heads, and that song is in the ancient language of the people of Mulhandir. Therefore, the old ruins of this magic quote-unquote shaper civilization, as they're called, that was once based here, must be something to do with this new curse. But no one has been to this city for thousands of years. Our only hope is that this dwarf happens to have rediscovered it in the last few weeks or so or something, and will now take us there. Isgrim joins the party, becomes immortal as a result and doesn't even say thank you, and we go and start looking for this ancient civilization. Must be around here somewhere, right? Well, yes, it actually is. Handily, only a few hundred meters away, there is a massive door in the side of a mountain that is clearly something to do with the Shapers. Isgrim has some magic words that supposedly will open the door, but they don't work, so I guess that's why he's stuck. But when Tahar says them, it opens right away. Much later in the game, it actually gives you a reason why only Tahar could possibly open this door, but for now, it's just because we're the protagonist. Before we can go in, though, an orc shows up and offers us a job. Yes, he noticed how good of a job we did killing the rest of the orcs, and he wants to recruit us to take part in the intra-orc wars going on. We're like, alright, maybe, and that's the end of that for now because we've got business to attend to. And later this will lead to some orc-themed stages. Back to business, though. Let's go through this magical door. On the other side is a series of tunnels, and while I can't find it in the footage, there was a conversation somewhere where it notes how strange it is that the tunnels haven't been opened for thousands of years but still have candles and torches burning in them, which I thought was going to be some kind of reference to the fact that every video game ever happily does this with no explanation. But this time, it's actually just a brief tip that the tunnels aren't so forgotten. They are packed with goblins. And this map is a quest to kill a bunch of goblins and feed their flesh to the Goblin King. They've got some kind of self-sustaining cannibal ecosystem going down here, and they speak good English for some reason, so it's all very civilized. The goal is to get the password of this king to enter the ancient city. Yes, turns out there's a second password you have to get from a goblin. These ancients were so powerful, they invented two-factor authentication logins. So while I do that, it's time for another round of What's the Deal with this guy? Where I quickly tell you Isgrim's deal. He was exiled from his society due to some drama concerning his ex. Yes, that's the same thing I said for the last character, but I really do think it happened again, and it will happen again after this. Isgrim's drama was something along the lines of his boyfriend got executed trying to overthrow the government because he wanted to make dwarves great again. It was something like that. It was something confusing, like his gay lover died trying to make gay marriage illegal, or something like that. Basically, Isgrim didn't really approve of what was going on there, and he was implicated in the seditious scheme by association, so left Dwarven society through self-exile and spent time studying the region's precursor civilization, the Shapers, or Zollenthep as they called themselves. So that's his issue with an X then, there'll be more later. Back to business, the Goblin King gives you all this intel on the ancient city, and he keeps talking about a mysterious beast actually that would come and eat the goblins, which really sounded like it was setting up some kind of boss. Seems like there wasn't one though, so I don't actually remember what all that dialogue was about. Therefore, we head on to this ancient city, somehow outside once again, without any trouble. This might be a good time to mention that we are playing not just Spellforce 3, but Spellforce 3 Reforced. I remember when I saw its name on Steam, I was like, they're so lazy, they didn't even notice they misspelled Reforged when inputting the title. But no, it actually is Reforced. It's not Reforged, it's not Reinforced, it's Reforced. What this means in practice is it's a classic case of the game being soft re-released after all the patches were applied because the original game drew too many complaints or something, I'm not quite sure. Reminds me of how you used to be able to play Total War Rome 2, but now there is only Total War Rome 2 Emperor Edition, which is basically just a fancy name for a version of the game with the outrageous problems patched out. So here and there I think the story was changed, but probably more so the game was changed beneath the story here and there, or the way the missions work was changed. And this could be one of the few cases where I thought the dialogue was referring to something that didn't happen, or there was some kind of dissonance there that might be caused by updates to the game. Another one that comes to mind is actually also in Mulhandir, so if you're lucky I'll remember to point that one out way later when it comes up. I think the rest of the changes were making it have a nice UI, and it certainly has a nice UI, and also simplifying but also intensifying the RTS parts, in that there used to be more economy micro, but it was more slow-paced. So perhaps my feeling that the game is very unusually high-paced and very intense is something to do with meddling that came after release in that regard. Well, anyway, there was something they did there, but I don't know what it was like before, so I guess I can't comment on that too much. They also added a bunch of bonus modes, apparently, and I literally didn't notice all these game modes in the main menu until after completing the game. That's an idea of how tunnel-visioned I am. Like, when I start the game, I don't even see the menu. Like, I just click on continue. I didn't notice there's loads of content in the game that isn't in the main campaign mode, and we're going to touch on that extremely briefly right at the end when I finally noticed that they'd added a whole bunch of other stuff. Anyway, the game is better now than it used to be, so we've avoided any curse of early access or fake curse of early access from it being broken on release or anything like that. So Mulhandir, it's a nice place, although it's very much deserted. A true horticulturalist will note the planting situation probably wouldn't have remained so neat for like thousands of years. It should be much worse than this. But it was implied that the goblins come in here sometimes, so perhaps we can explain this by saying that generations of goblin gardeners have been keeping everything clean and nice for our arrival. There are some so-called ghosts in here as well. We learned that to reach the main hub of the city, we're going to have to pass a barrier which in some way is powered by 3 guardian spirits. These spirits are actual shapers, the ancient people, and while we refer to them as ghosts at first, I think we much later realise they're actually just really old. They just act weird because the shapers had a penchant for punishing criminals by turning them into quasi-undead servants. Perhaps backed up by the fact that when you first arrive in the city, it's packed with undead enemies to kill, which I've already done here to harvest the experience. Anyway, interestingly, these shapers have the same power as us, in that they revive at godstones when killed. You can fiddle with the stone to prevent this and thus kill off the ghosts to progress, and when you kill them for real, they drop these fragments of the same kind of rune that we were given to get our immortality, so it's some kind of shaper technology. How did the High Priest have these to give out? I think this might be explained later, but I can't remember, so what I'm doing here is putting everything on the table at once. This is either a plot hole, and I'm snarking about it here like, how did that happen? Or it's a carefully laid piece of the puzzle, in which case I'm like, ooh, foreshadowing, it all makes sense now. I'm not brave enough to do proper commentary, so what I need you to do is just let me say everything, and then remember only the one that makes me sound the most right in the end. Can you do that for me? Thank you very much. We go through that barrier and head deeper into the city. There are 2 bosses on the way where you fight a giant thing, but now we have Iskrim. My battling troubles have eased. He's got loads of health, high resistances, and a shield, so we have him do most of the fighting. He doesn't actually block that much, it's like 20 to 30% of the time. But since Tahar and Iria are light mages, we can constantly heal with overlapping cooldowns to keep Iskrim alive much longer than usual, which allows us to get the job done. Later we'll spec out Iskrim to be better at tanking. We've also got zombies fighting for us. Tahar is a light and dark mage, so necromancy will be a key part of my build, because I immediately recognise that having an infinitely summonable pool of distractions will be useful. And they do similar damage to infantry units from the RTS segments, so having 3 of these join you in the generally lower stat world of RPG battles makes a decent difference. We reach the city core, where a massive pillar of unobtainium provides energy to the city, and also is the source of shaper magic. Iskrim explains that because of this pillar, The Shapers were telepathic. He also realizes the energy here can let him combine the broken immortality runes from those 3 Shaper quote-unquote ghosts with our own shiny new ones, and this means they're even stronger now in some way, which I think doesn't necessarily matter for the plot, but it does give you some extra health and mana regeneration, or something like that, in-game, so that's useful. Thank you very much, Isgrim. We also decide that with these rumours about there being a song linked to the Bloodburn, it's probably something to do with this Shaper telepathy, like we're telepathically hearing the song and then getting ill. I say we, some people are. Some kind of echo or message the Shapers were sending out that's probably coming from this room, since this is the source of their telepathy in general. So we have to investigate this area, like that's our main lead. However, the pillar, well, before you can access its BIOS, you have to insert the 3 things. What do you know? It's time to collect the 3 things. The 3 things arc is here in our hero's quest. Handily, there is a map showing where the 3 things are on a table just a few meters away. We're still getting pretty lucky like that, huh? The things are magic stones in this case, which will activate this thing and allow us to do something with it. It's very sort of spurious, like, well, maybe if we activate this, it will in some way allow us to investigate this disease. We're just kind of doing it at this stage. It's a long shot, but seems pretty cool to do anyway. Like, I would do this even if there wasn't a disease to investigate, so yes, let's go ahead. According to this map, which the game actually never shows you, but the characters talk about it, the 3 things to collect are in dangerous locations that will be hard to get to, and they're gonna take some combination of heroic adventuring and strategic battling to secure. So there you go, there's some gameplay lined up for us. We now unlock the world map with 3 different quests to go on. You can do them in any order, although there is probably a correct order here, where you try to get the best items and most EXP first. Not knowing anything about that, I decided to go and visit the elves. There is an elf mission, an orc mission, and a human mission, representing the 3 main factions you can play as in the base game. So we'll go help the elves with something, and see if they have this stone that is supposedly in their region. And also while we're there, we are aiming to recruit them to our private army. Maybe I wasn't paying attention, but at some point our heroes decided that we do need to build a private army to help in this quest, using Mulhandir as a secret base, and you'll see that over time we kind of repopulate the city with people we draw into our new little organisation here. I'm sure it does exposit like why you got into doing this or why you even think it's necessary, but I don't know, I remember not really understanding why we needed an army. Outside of like being able to see the game's script. Like for all we know, the 3 stones to collect will just be behind other hidden doors similar to this place, and we just go in and pick them up. But maybe our characters foresaw there's going to be a bunch of RTS action on the way and we need to have a massive army at our back to go to all of these places. I don't know, just copy in "it came to me in a dream.txt" into the script and we can be on our way. There's an elven community to find somewhere in this jungle here, so first I'll roam around getting EXP and scouting the map of course. You can even sometimes find RTS resources in boxes and collect them before the RTS battles begin to get a head start. So just another reason to explore everything possible before advancing story quests. And you find blueprints. Blueprints are random bits of paper you find in the world that unlock units and buildings in the RTS modes and give you buffs, like cheaper unit production. They are the tech tree, essentially. And originally when I was playing, I was going to complain that you had to, quote-unquote, unlock iron mining or something by finding an ancient scroll about it. Like all this tech doesn't already exist or something. Like, this isn't supposed to be ancient knowledge, why do I have to unlock the ability to make a swordsman by finding something in an ancient ruin? Later it's recontextualized as being more like training or drills that are somehow just sort of represented by the paper in abstraction, that allow you to effectively deploy technology that you have in battle, so it's more practical or something. And you also get a more sensible way of unlocking these techs later that makes more in-universe sense. So this alleviates my snark, I'll let them off the hook. And it is a good idea in principle, like a way to combine the traditional tech tree of an RTS game with the adventuring of an RPG game is have you find the techs in the world. Like, it makes sense at that level. It's just like, okay, but there isn't actually any reason for these techs to be out there in the world to find, or for us to not have another way of getting to them. Well, I just said I wouldn't snark, I'm doing it anyway. As you can see here, I went on to have some fun antics with an optional boss. There was this ritual site with an arrow pointing to a pedestal. You had the option of activating either the pedestal indicated or another one on the opposite side. I decided to obey whoever left this arrow on the ground, just like I always comply with wallet inspectors when asked, and it turns out to be a bad idea. A boss is summoned who also has this area of effect burn damage thing going on, meaning that just standing here will quickly get us killed. I just stand there, and we are quickly killed. Because now we've lost 3 lives at once, a party wipe means game over. Therefore, the truly Iron Man portion of the run ends here. Our story ended when our heroes got distracted, accidentally summoned an ancient evil, and died. Well, I came back thanks to the time-travelling magic of saves, and found out what the other pedestal does. It summons a massive cloud of gas that also kills you. So there you have it. I did actually defeat this boss on my second attempt, but only because I found that if you leave the area after summoning it, it will follow you for a while and then try to walk back. Hence, we find the edge of its aggro range and can shoot arrows from just outside said range to continuously make the boss walk backwards and forwards. The boss does have regenerating HP, but it was just about out-damaging that, meaning that with enough exploiting we can win here. After 10 minutes of janky action and adding Irius magic to the mix, the demon is destroyed, and I was thinking surely it will drop some overpowered optional item here, right? Well, almost. It drops a crafting component that right at the end of the game can be used to craft some decent armor with a special effect. I think it's armor that auto-revives you on death. But you need 2 other ultra-rare things first that are much later in the game. Basically, if I wanted that armor, I could have come back here at the end of the game and killed that boss with a high-level party, as having the ingredients in advance provides absolutely no advantage. Therefore, I have wasted my time, and yes, if you've seen OffyD videos before, you know what I'm going to say next. I've wasted your time as well. I guess you do get some EXP for killing the boss. It was about 10% of what you needed to level up right now. Not all that impressive, but yes, there was some minor advantage to glean in doing that as soon as possible. After about 20 minutes of exploring, I clearly got bored because I decided to not do the top part of the map and just go visit the elf town instead. Obviously, the first and primary reason to come here is to steal things. They have foolishly not nailed down various resources and items, so we wordlessly begin to lift everything we can. While I was doing this, I was checking out this comfy little corner over here, and seeing this reminded me that I've committed a sin in this commentary. I've now spoken for over an hour on an RTS game without complaining that you can't zoom the camera out far enough, or that I was mad at being forced to zoom the camera out. I'll address the second point first to make things more confusing. This game is really detailed down at the ground level. Like, the level of graphical quality is frankly too high. I'm spending money to render all this detail, and I never get to look at it. Why? Because it's a classic case of a control scheme and UI that gives you more control and more ease of use the further away from the ground you can get the camera. So I'm almost always at the maximum zoom out, which does contribute to lowering immersion, I find, because you miss endless rich details in all of the lovingly crafted maps. But at the same time, I'm also mad that it won't let me zoom out further, and if it did let me do that, I would be further away all the time and see even less. That's because just being able to see more makes your life easier in a game like this, so I prioritize field of vision over having that field actually look nice or contain anything interesting. You might have noticed in battles that buildings are unusually big for an RTS game like this, which gives me, as a long-time RTS player, this really close-in and cramped feeling where I'm always wishing I was further away and getting a more strategic view. Supreme Commander's camera system is how to do it. There is no alternative. All games doing something else are lesser for it. It's already been solved, but nobody else cottoned onto this. Let the player choose. And I know it comes with technical issues. That's just the ask I'm going to have to make to the programmers on the dev teams. Somehow get smooth zooming and rapid level of detail changes to work. It can be done. Someone else did it once. And as the patron saint of scrolling the mouse wheel back only to have nothing happen, I must preach the good word of zoom out redemption. Anyway, we learned that the elves here are having some trouble with a disease. Only they aren't quite sure what this disease is. One faction thinks it's the bloodburn, only that it has different symptoms to Bloodburn seen elsewhere because they're elves and magic and stuff. Already a little bit spurious there, like, oh, it's the same disease, it just has different symptoms. But isn't that almost the definition of a different disease? Well, we'll get to that. There's talk of elves going mad and their eyes turning black and attacking everyone they see, something like that. It's a kind of like Chekhov's gun issue here, really, because they established that this is a thing that can happen, but it doesn't seem to be happening. And in particular, with this setup, they can now punish the player and reveal some story at the same time by having Iria get this disease. She's an elf. The story reveal would be that it's not bloodborne, basically, because I think we know that we are immune to bloodburn, so if we get whatever this disease is, that means it's not bloodburn. I think being immortal means we're sort of immune to everything, I guess, so this is hard to say. There's some factor where, like, powerful mages don't get symptoms after hearing the cursed Bloodborne song. Bloodborne song? If only it was a Bloodborne song. Anyway, this elf issue isn't actually Bloodburn, that's the point. The other faction already suspects this, and they tell you that Bloodburn does kill elves normally, and they've seen this happen, so this must be something else. They think it's a punishment from the gods, and they just need to straighten up and get the gods back on side. The guardians are the gods in this case. They call them the guardians to differentiate from a unit in the game, which is also called guardians, extra confusing. To clarify what the religion of this land is, by the way, there's the guy that I've been calling God, that's Aunir, the main ruler. Then the Guardians are more like a pantheon with X God of Y arrangements. I think if you take a skeptical lens to how things play out in the world and like what magic works and why, you might be able to conclude that the Guardian gods are real and are very present in the world, whereas the All-Father Aunir actually isn't, which would be consistent with the Purity believing that he left the world and needs to be re-summoned. There's only a remnant of Aunir's magic, and that's Aunir's rune, the thing making you immortal. So there was some supreme power at one point, and his credit card still works, so maybe he's alive out there somewhere after all. But if you're going to pray to a god or something, you might as well pick one of the lesser ones, because they're listening at the moment, I think. Well, I got distracted again. I was going to say, it would be cool if this idea of an elven curse had a gameplay consequence. It would also be really, really annoying if Iria was lost from the party, and I'd be mad about that also. And it would really be punishing you for playing this map first, because you can get a bigger party if you do the other maps first, as it turns out, and then doing this and having the punishment might be okay. Well, I just think it would show you that the world is serious, and that you might need to care about all these threats that are coming up in the plot, because as it stands, we are way too plot armored to actually care about all of the dangers everyone's ranting about. We just plow in, we kill and loot everything, from a small forest creature to like an avatar of the actual gods just appearing in a summoning circle. We don't have to care, and the characters know they don't have to care. Like, they don't ever express concerns or fears for what they're doing in the game. It's not so bad because they know they're immortal, which gives the game a bit of a pass here, which others wouldn't have. But still, there is some unexplored ludo-narrative territory there. Speaking of which, I've gone and explored all of the elven territory. We found a number of poisoned pools, which appear to be the source of the problem, and a large talking tree told us there's a corruption infecting life around here, including it. And this really isn't Bloodburn's style, so it's certainly a more localized problem. All we need to do is go tell the elves about this. However, you can also get sidetracked if you like, and I do like. There's a Purity base in the northeast, home to their zealous private army of their own, the Bane. The Bane are the more genocidal arm of the anti-magic movement, so they're chomping at the bit to genocide the nearby elves, of course. But not all of their troops are really sold on the idea, and some of them work with us instead. They're still somewhat loyal to the crown over the church in this case. There's a bit of a divide going on. Well, they don't help us all that much, as it turns out. They do give us some of their troops and a side quest to go onto a different map and investigate a shipwreck situation. Immediately forgetting my promises to the elves, I decided to do that next. But first, they also give you this tip that your old friend Bertrand, the other archer hero we had earlier, is lurking in the woods here because he wants to meet up with us in secret. So let's go check that out. Within moments, we're being mercilessly killed. Yes, I've fallen for the whole lion putting up a zebra entrance sign trick once again. What wasn't hugely clear in this messy brawl is that one of the attackers switches sides and helps you. After the fight, you can talk to her about this kerfuffle and hence get introduced to Iana, probably the most interesting of the party characters I bothered to delve into during my run. And I'm not just saying that because she is my future ex-girlfriend. I'm also saying it because she is rampantly overpowered. in ways I regrettably didn't fully realise until the end of the game. Gradually, you'll see me unlock her true potential, until the point when she functions something like an ICBM. Yes, as you might have guessed, she joins the party at this point, saying that she too wants to cure the Bloodburn, and was willing to betray her deal to kill us to prove her loyalty to us. Well, thanks, mate. The employer is someone called Leonida, a noble woman who was seen very briefly in an earlier scene I probably cut out, and I think appears again right at the end of the game. There's a whole load of drama and politics going on with the 4 noble houses and their leaders that our characters all know about, but I don't, so I just kind of glossed over it. I actually don't know why they wanted us dead in this instance. Iana probably explained it, but I wasn't listening because I was busy testing out her new skill. Yes, from glossing to glazing, it's time for the Why Iana is the Best character introduction rant. As you may have seen, Iana can actually split into 3 people. Yep, she has a doppelganger ability that summons 2 additional Ianas for a ridiculously low cost. They do eventually disappear, but you can extremely easily keep them summoned permanently because they're so cheap, and the summoning takes like half a second, so you can whip them out in between attacks mid-combat if the doppelgangers die. Yes, we now have an infinite supply of basically free hero-tier soldiers to use in combat. All of the RPG sections of the game were easy from here on. It's night and day, so Iana's going to be in the party for as much of the game as possible. There is another advantage too to having her around. She explains that she is a Dreamweaver, which if I remember correctly, and I don't, is someone who's experienced some massive trauma that has half destroyed their soul, which makes them this magical demi-human entity that can read minds and indeed split into multiple people at will, apparently. Iana actually hints at her drama right away, saying that she wants to cure Bloodburn because it took someone close to her. Yes, you've probably guessed already what Iana's deal is, but I think her drama with an X was not only her call to adventure, but it was also what turned her into a Dreamweaver. And that gives you an advantage in that, if you have her in the party, she will occasionally use her powers to give you hints about what people you're talking to are really thinking. I like this because, as we'll see later, you have a lot of choice about who you have in your party, and the dialogues you get will be different throughout the game based on your choice. But of course, as ranted about already, the story is on rails enough that this can't really have any material effect on things. So it doesn't really matter, like in the most satisfying role-playing sort of way, like who you choose. But still, having Iana in the party all the time gets a little bit better because of this psychic detail. Iana is a really interesting character because she's the most gentle and generous depiction of someone who is unapologetically evil. I don't know if that's really the right term. She's so neutral about everything that she doesn't see evil acts as being evil or have that conception, and in that way carries out evil acts all the time. So that's how she's unapologetically evil, I guess. She proclaims that she is addicted to killing people. She's a real psycho, basically, and she's constantly tormented by desires to kill everyone. So an ideal party member, I say. But yeah, she's completely at peace with that part of herself. She just rolls with it. She explains that at one point that she doesn't feel emotions in the way others do, and she doesn't feel very human. And she knows what she is in that regard. She plays into it by living a life in which killing people comes up all the time, first as an assassin, and now as the very tip of the spear in our hero party and the army in general. At the same time, she's extremely chill, softly spoken, chaotic neutral in that she notes evil without condoning or condemning it, I guess. I got the impression she was supposed to be an attempt at a realistic-ish depiction of a sort of fantasy sociopathy, a character written from the perspective of living a human life without feeling like one of the humans, a personified mental illness who's mastered their own condition. And furthermore, she is accepted freely by the party as well, despite being the least trustworthy seeming person in the entire game, including the villains. There is a normal woman deep down inside, her past self, who lost her love to the Bloodburn, and so her loyalty to you in trying to make that right is ironclad, and she genuinely likes you to the extent she can like anything, as evidenced perhaps by the fact she doesn't kill you. She's the party member you find out the least about, because she takes real convincing to gradually tell her backstory about her ex. But to some extent that's because she is the most traumatized by said backstory and doesn't want it to matter. but from her actions it is evident that the only thing she cares about enough to rise above her psychopathy and return to being a real person for is this quest. Oh, to be me in the Iana fan club ranting to you about this. I hope you all are putting up whatever I'm putting down. Would I be glazing Iana this hard if she wasn't also probably the best combat character in the game? I don't know. Being an alien from the future myself, I can relate to her human-adjacent view on things, which is a theme that came up with a few other characters actually, about not feeling normal and not understanding basic things. Like the game has an undercurrent of being very accepting of an assortment of neurodivergencies from the various characters and exploring how they see the world because of them. And I wondered if that was an intentional focus they had when writing some of the characters. I don't know, Tahar, like the main character, serves as this normie foil to everyone else, with the possible exception of Iria, who's also pretty normal. It's kind of like Iria is supposed to be your waifu, so you can be normal together, but the other characters all have this I can fix them / we're broken together vibe, where they're either just crazy up front or they become crazy the more you know about them. Which is the case with, say, Iskrim, as we'll see later on. You know what? Let's not get into the full shipping dynamics because we don't even have the full cast yet, do we? Long story short, I got Iana, absolutely obliterated the side quest to find a shipwreck and fight some Medusae, and eventually we returned to the main quest. Back in town, we tell the elves that the gods haven't forsaken them, nor is the bloodburn here. Their problems are caused by corrupted pools of water in the forest. The elf leaders literally like, oh yeah, this happened before actually, I know what to do. And I'll note that the water you can see in the background of this shot is the stuff, like they could have seen this. Somehow nobody noticed it had been poisoned, even though it emits this green fog. Maybe everyone else is affected by the fog of war, so they can't see it out there, the same as us. That would be a nice ludonarrative resonance, wouldn't it? Anyway, because of our commanding aura, we're put in charge of the local elven army, and given the task of getting to work on the pools with this anti-corruption spell. That's the easy part. The issue is that the Bane have snapped, and things are going down in these woods. The human army was split between the genocide enjoyers and the woke betas who claim that killing all elves would be quote-unquote racist. Therefore, we get this starting army of defectors who will fight on our side, but we mainly control the elves. The game gives a brief tutorial summary on how to play as the elves, but because the clock is already ticking, I didn't feel like I had time to read it properly. Basically, I'll have to learn on the job, and given that I barely know the first thing about like a good build order or even how the economy really works, what this amounts to is making things almost randomly and seeing how it goes. I also delay in sending out my heroes to claim new sectors because I wasn't skilled enough to be on top of that yet, and here the map does start unoccupied, as revealed by my early scouting. However, the Purity forces spawn a load of free units when this part of the quest begins, which are guarding certain areas, such that they will naturally be claimed by the Purity once their heroes get there. Also, they start with a built-up base, so the momentum is on their side, and they do not wait around. 3.5 minutes in, while I was trying to read tooltips and work out what to do with this pool cleansing system you need to run on the side, the Purity were in my base killing my dudes. Luckily, I'd made a defensive tower out of paranoia, so we're pushing back a little. Then, as I run my heroes halfway across the map to contest this area, the enemy retreat as soon as I'm in their line of sight, and this was the first big indication of how screwed I am in this game. The AI is actually good. Here, they've not only avoided losses in this engagement, but more importantly, their heroes have been able to progress along the top of the map, taking territory, whereas my hero runback happened just as I was going down the bottom of the map to do the same, meaning I'm even further behind now. I thought I would push north instead, but as I did, the enemy armies slipped past me and attacked my capital sector again, forcing me to abandon my attack on their base at the top and come back. And as my main force reaches the bridge into my base, the enemy bulked once again, just about failing to bring down my tower, but they did kill a load of workers and troops, and as they retreat, this time I'm confident enough to chase them. They retreat past one of their bases, so I stop to begin destroying it. However, I then have to run all the way across the map again, because that attack was only a distraction. Their main attack, featuring the heroes, appears all the way down south. Remember, the attacks with heroes are the more dangerous ones because they can take your territory, and given the timing they must have set this attack group off at the same time as the one that raided my main base, and if you've played a load of PvE RTS games against campaign opponents, you might join me in thinking that this level of play is remarkably good and it doesn't feel scripted at all. It's just got a decent AI bot, and the campaign mission is, can you win a single skirmish match against a decent opponent? I felt the opportunity cost of being made to run across the map really hard here. And then, while we do save our base down there, despite it being half killed, the enemy fought only briefly, then withdrew. I started chasing them, but there's already another army attacking my capital sector. I'm getting played like a goddamn fiddle right here, getting kited and feinted in every direction. I knew I couldn't just go back and fight, because I've already wasted too much time doing that, so I pushed east. I hoped to recruit my way into somehow defending the capital. The problem now though is that my economy micro isn't good enough to do this. The time spent getting more recruitment online and even just working out where each building was in the build palette in the bottom right was taking too long. I let my army idle, I didn't find a new sector to take in the south, and then I broke. I decided I might actually lose my capital to the current attack, so I came back. If I'd advanced slightly further, I would have taken a Godstone, which are the fast travel points which you can use even during the RTS segments, and that would allow me to teleport back to my base and largely counter the negative effects of being feinted and raided all the time, but I was likely too panicked to think about doing anything like that. I think I ran back to a much less useful Godstone basically. Remember, all this was happening within the first few minutes of me playing as the elves for the first time. Like, I'm just impressed at the AI here. It's losing all the fights, but it's winning the battle, and this is a rare sight. I'm impressed, but at the time of playing, I was very stressed, like I just didn't know what was going on. I tried going for an all-out attack to capture a base near their main base and focus the battle there. That would make things easier. The problem is that the enemy reached iron units before me, meaning units that cost iron to make and are generally better. So now we face knights and catapults, plus defensive fire from the outpost building I'm attacking, and the moment our heroes get targeted, we're in trouble. We fight on for a while in a chaotic, messy brawl in which I try to save Iana from death to avoid losing lives, but ultimately only get drawn deeper into failure in my attempts to do so. And after a while, I'm straight up routed. I had to fall back to my own base. I started putting down towers and preparing for something bad to happen. After only a few more minutes, I'm fully under siege. I've got a decent army out now, however the enemy are regularly attacking all 3 of my sectors, forcing me to spread units out. And because I only have 3 sectors, my pop cap is limited. One unique thing about the elves is that they gain pop cap only as they gain territory or upgrade their sector buildings. And, well, I can't gain territory and I haven't unlocked upgrades for the sector buildings, so I'm stuck with a small army. I need to attack, but I can't, or at the very least I can't bring myself to do it without feeling like I'd be losing control. Since resources are finite, I can still theoretically trade my way to victory without attacking, like I did against the orcs. However, on a full map, I recall doing some of the back-of-the-envelope calculations, and there's enough stuff to make thousands of popcap worth of units, and infinite swordsmen, the generic food-only unit. So it's not the best idea. And anyway, a big night raid breaks through and kills my heroes eventually, with me being way too slow to position my army to save them, so this is partially just me being in shock again and not reacting really, I think. But it's game over. I needed to rethink my plan here because we didn't come anywhere close to winning there, we got destroyed really. Luckily, I did have a couple of ideas to get a much better start, based on some things I saw that made me think we might be able to do some good old-fashioned, scripted event exploiting shenanigans. Test 1. Can I somehow kill off the enemies before the battle starts? You can cast a few spells without a valid target, but unfortunately they don't have their usual effects. Again, it should have an effect in that these Purity Bane troops should execute me on the spot for using magic in public, but never mind that. Test number 2. Use the Godstones to rush really hard. My original plan was to teleport right into the enemy base with a load of starting units. However, the Godstone there gets deactivated when the fight starts. Instead, I can teleport to a point I was contesting earlier, that one near the enemy base, which could serve as a choke point and prevent them from expanding to the rest of the map if I cause enough trouble there. I don't know why I didn't take all my units to do this, leaving a load to do nothing in the base instead, but this plan does work in that I take that forward sector. However, I'm also slow to do anything else, due to the micro required and because my heroes were in that fight. That means I wasn't taking the neutral sectors near my base early on. That means fewer resources and less developed sectors in general, and I even struggled to take the southwest sector, as those cursed pools do generate hostile animals to fight you sometimes. To hold my forward base, I decided to try out this unique mechanic for the elves, the Shrine of Thorns. You have the option of building alternate sector outposts that don't provide any workers, meaning you effectively can't use the sector for anything. Pretty good, huh? It's even the first option in the list, which confused me at first, thinking it was the normal one. Anyway, the reward for picking this option is that the shrine will shoot enemies harder than the usual Shrine of Growth path, so it's like committing to have one tower in the sector that's hard to destroy. I thought this would be the best fortification route, but in retrospect, going Shrine of Growth and putting all of your workers in watchtowers does more damage and leaves you with the option of having unit production on the front line. I got suckered into this Shrine of Thorns thing, and I eventually pay the price, as my forward base can't take the pressure. I've got my heroes defending it, while my army is trying to take out the enemy base beside my capital. I need to delay at the front while expanding into the rest of the map, that's the plan. The only flaw is that my heroes died too much holding back the tide, and ultimately I got game overed here. I'm going to blame the Shrine of Thorns for this, as it wasn't the one building to hold back an army commitment that I was expecting, given how massive the economic downside of picking it is. I think I only ever used it one other time, and generally, I'd recommend always picking the other upgrade tree, no matter what. The next idea was a simple one: grind. If I could get my heroes up a level or something, perhaps they'd stay alive longer. Unfortunately, once you commit to doing a quest, you can't visit the other maps to look for gear or enemies, because all travel options are locked until the matter at hand is resolved, foiled by ludonarrative resonance here. I could check out the side quest map again, and I hoped enemies spawned, but nay. The next plan was another rush, but all the way to the enemy base this time. I also had my units already standing in the enemy base as the stage started, but they died instantly, a bad sign, yet I tried to attack anyway, and this failed. Next plan, something a little more measured. I used a Godstone in the south to quickly secure some middle sectors that the Purity doesn't get any free units spawning around in the beginning, meaning I can effectively reserve the sectors closer to my base for later by establishing a front line further forward. The other thing is that with each attempt, I'm getting slightly more familiar with the buildings and economy in the game, so that's got to be helping too. I'll save the full ranting about how it really works and how I discovered it all for later. This setup now becomes a lot like my first attempt, in which I'm generally treading water trying to hold off enemy attacks. Only this time they can only attack 2 sectors instead of 3. Well, actually there is a third one they can attack, but they didn't. And I have more PopCap to play with. That means that trading well is more helpful, as I can gradually build up my force in the background until I can field something worthy of pushing out with. We don't have enough territory to reach the overall PopCap of 200, so I need to push out as soon as I have my force about as strong as it can currently be. But as I do so, I also keep a smaller army in the capital sector to counter-raid when the enemy brings groups of catapults to shoot down my buildings, which was happening constantly over there. Just need a bit of micro, and lucky enough the main attack on the enemy sector can be done easy enough by attack moving a huge blob in the relevant direction, my personal favourite strategy in an RTS. There's only one problem: it doesn't work. With a 2-front battle going on, and the enemy pouring more troops constantly onto both fronts, it was an uphill battle, and as I mentioned before, attacks from the enemy sector buildings are strong enough to kill heroes really fast. So once our front lines had thinned out, the danger levels rise and rise. So on this occasion I couldn't make the push, or even get close really, so I routed back to my defensive lines and got back to making units. The silver lining is that losing the regular units I was making so far opens up more room for filling the army with superior iron-costing units. The elves get phalanx-style heavy spears that buff all nearby units with extra resistance to damage, and archers whose arrows pierce targets, perfect for shooting into blobs. That combo alone invites the idea of a front line of tanky shield guys, with archers Swiss cheesing the enemy mass in front. In practice, that will never happen really, as the fighting takes place in the narrow gaps between the massive buildings and terrain features all over the place. So, like, formation fighting isn't really a thing, but the idea is there. The other cheaper option would be to replace those iron-costing archers with the regular Guardian archers, which are an alternate combat mode of your generic swordsman that I usually forgot you could use. We might see it here and there. You can see an example of the very choke-pointed combat that happens sometimes here, and an example of how eager the AI is to use catapults. We're getting absolutely bombarded as we try to push out and get to them. However, it's not all that bad, as most units have a 50% resistance to siege-type damage. So that's something. Not that it's stopping us from getting moderately killed as we try to get in there and take things out. Well, the grinding build-up continues then, until I create this strike team of mostly ballistae, which are our elven siege weapon, our equivalent to the catapult. I move these back to that base I failed to take earlier, and focus down the main building. However, the enemy response is too strong to do anything else, so I withdraw, but what I didn't know is that just taking out the main building is a really good move. A sector with no main building can't do anything, even if all the other buildings are still in place, which I didn't realise. So that was pretty good, although they will just put it back soon enough in this case. I went back on the defensive in the south. Meanwhile, a similar drama was playing out in the north, as endless catapults threaten my capital. I decided to focus on the north instead, and finally something worked out. The enemy were still pouring troops into the south, so while the fighting there grinded on with a load of towers on my side helping out, I sent a group north and successfully took an enemy base. You can see that I don't claim the territory right away because I wanted to clear out all the enemy buildings first, but yes, that doesn't matter, as they don't function without their sector buildings. The best thing to do is claim the sector as soon as you can to get your workers generating quicker and start building yourself up just beside the enemy buildings. Anyway, after 45 minutes of back and forth grinding, I've finally broken the stalemate. And then another 10 minutes of grinding at these new positions occurs, and after that, I've got all my defences down, my armies are together, and it's time for a big push. I advanced with all of my units at once, from both north and south. We are attacking different sectors, so it's not quite a pincer attack, but it does mean the enemy can't respond as effectively to either, forced to split their units, or maybe even only defend one if that's how the AI perceives incoming threats. The hordes of spammed catapults do less well on the more open ground here, but after we're through them we've got the regular units to contend with. And yes, you true strategists might have noted this split attack idea. Trying to weaken the enemy's response also weakens me in the exact same way. So whether it's really a good idea is hard to say, like just having one big blob push in might actually do better. Who knows? Well, things are working out. What ended up happening is we seemed to be fighting loads of units incoming in the north, so I pulled back a bit and made that into the feint attack essentially. We fought their army up there, while the real attack pressed against buildings down in the south and made some headway. I secured the sector there, then dug in while new units arrived and existing ones healed up, but shortly after, 1 minute later, it was time to keep pushing because now I really could make a pincer attack on the next sector to the north. So things are speeding up now. Our combined forces, packed with siege weapons, start rampaging through buildings, clearing the sector, and even heading north to harass more buildings. But then the enemy counterattack to the south, forcing me back to stop them. My army is big enough that I can split it and still fight both fights really. However, once I've settled on some control groups, I usually can't be bothered to change them, so I just move things around in blobs or use the aforementioned all units hotkey. In this case, the distances aren't so large anymore, so we can't really fall for being kited, we're just stomping out enemy units and resources. After this, I tried to push east, finding even more enemy buildings, but the enemy counterattacked to the west, forcing me back again. Still some great thrashing about gameplay from the AI, and I was surprised it's keeping its production up despite me now controlling 80% of the map. Perhaps it stockpiled resources, or perhaps it was just cheating. You can never know with games like this. They tend to be ones where letting the AI cheat is the easy shortcut to AI design. And because the game doesn't tell you what the difficulty levels do, I feel obliged to assume that it's taking the cheating route, because if they had done something more clever, they probably would have wanted to brag about it, being like, the AI is more aggressive and reacts to your build in a difficulty description tooltip, something like that. The conspiracies deepen, but this is a conspiracy that's usually correct, so we'll go with it here. After another 15 minutes of back and forth thrashing, gradually sniping down buildings and creeping forward, I make an attack on the enemy main base. It was still crawling with enemies and half of my army died in the attack. However, the surviving ballistae blob, most of the PopCap at this stage, took out their capital building, which made everything else explode suddenly, bringing the final battle to an immediate end. An exhausting battle of constant micro, played over 2 to 3 hours. It was the polar opposite of the chill, watch your guys run across the map and fight a spider gameplay of the RPG segment. And it was a really challenging strategy game experience that I did not expect, basically. With more experience, I think especially for the first 5 minutes of the stage, you can make radical strategy improvements that will cause later stages to become more normal feeling. But yes, I really felt like the game didn't let you breathe here, and for the stage that is the de facto tutorial for the elf army, this was very much a trial by fire. So much so that I don't even really think I learnt many lessons along the way, because I was just panic building. Like, I've gotten used to the units now, but it's the beginning of match economy and build order that I'm still clueless on, and as you might know, if you've wasted your life in the realm of RTS, everything hinges on the first few moments of gameplay. Like, RTSs are basically positive feedback loop game design, the genre. Like, what happens in the first 1 second matters a billion times more than whatever you do after 3 hours. So, while we've triumphed, as I said before, my large amount of gameplay time is only translating to small amounts of experience, and I'm going to have to face the same problems in stages to come as a result. But don't worry, there is light at the end of the tunnel. These RTS segments can be mastered and tamed, especially with some choice exploits from the RPG side of things that I shall be revealing much later. There's a brief boss at the end where you fight the corrupted tree mentioned earlier. You can bring your RTS army to do this, so it's really a freebie. Shouldn't have brought the heroes because I'm just putting them at risk here. After that, you've completed the elven recruitment quest, and with a surprising lack of further ado, the elves agree to send their army to Mulhandir. The idea is we're going to use them to capture the dangerous areas in which the two things needed to do the thing with the thing that might allow us to stop that thing are held. So you can proceed with the story from here. However, you can also go and get human and orc armies if you like. In retrospect, you genuinely don't need more than one of the 3 armies you can recruit. Basically, you're only allowed to use one for most of the game. And only occasionally do you get extra units here and there if the humans and orcs are also allied to you. But even with that in mind, doing more missions means more experience and more maps to look for items on. Ideally, you need to do everything because the items for the RPG gameplay and the unit unlocks and upgrades for the RTS gameplay are mostly found by going to random containers all over the game world. So really you need to go everywhere and do most quests, even if you only care about one side or the other of the game. It's a way in which I feel the RTS and RPG sides aren't perfectly matched, I guess, because if you really like the RPG gameplay, to get the gear and a strong party, you still have to do all of the optional RTS stages, which is about half of them, I'd say. Theoretically, this is a good thing, because in your RTS RPG hybrid, you need the 2 wings of gameplay progression to be interlinked. It's only because they have 2 styles that are so different in feel, in vibe, and particularly in difficulty, that I ended up feeling that maybe it was bad how intertwined they were, because it stops you playing the game so much for just one wing or the other. Yes, my complaint here is that this RTS RPG has both RTS and RPG elements at the same time, which you might think I should expect, but somehow there's enough disconnect between the 2 sides of the game, and how the rules and expectations change between them, that I ended up wishing for something smoother. What do I mean? Maybe I mean something where you always have your RTS units and it's more normal to use them while adventuring, but more likely I probably mean less of a ramp up in intensity as soon as the RTS portions start, or even more role-playing options to affect them by preparing and doing sneaky hero stuff or talking to the right people, so that when the action starts, you feel like it's more integrated into your hero's journey and is more affected by it. Well, as I continue to wave my hands, the orc mission begins. You might have seen Gore, our new orc hero. wants us to help him with a conflict between various orc tribes. We need to piece an army together out of them if we want to recruit them into our own army, so we'd best get to proving our dominance on the battlefield. Although I am immediately sidetracked by the fact there is this optional cave you can head into on this map, and deep inside it, you can recruit an optional character. He's some kind of dark magic demon summoner, who is actually pretty cool. However, when it comes to what's the deal with this character introductions, this is where my knowledge begins to fail me. I'll tell you now that what happened later in the game was I got very worn down, and got to a point when I thought the game was about to end, when it totally wasn't. So I skipped over a whole load of dialogue thinking, well, the final battle is in today's play session, so let's just get it over with and ignore the optional scenes with Gore and whoever this guy is, and some others we'll meet later. You get experience for doing those scenes, so I just mashed through them, and as a result, I do not remember what the deal with Gore or this new guy is. They probably had trouble with an X, almost certainly. We'll never really see them in this playthrough, so we'll just ignore them, apart from right now when I have Gore for the current battle. He can summon undead, the same as Tahar. So we'll be spamming zombie meat shields even harder than usual for a bit. The battle starts unexpectedly soon. I didn't get the chance to explore the map first because I inadvertently walked into this orc village, which you then take control of, and Gore tells you to subdue the other tribes by either killing their champions, mini-bosses in their bases basically, or maybe reason with them if they allow it. For the most part it's going to be more killing and less reasoning, for such is the orc way. As with the elves, it gives you 5 microseconds of tutorial and then the battle is on. The orcs have a more aggression-focused playstyle than the humans or elves, in that they don't require recruitment buildings to make units, your sector buildings make them instead, meaning you can start spamming units from any territory as soon as you take it. Absolutely perfect for rushing. But the enemies start with the map locked down this time, so we actually need to progress more methodically. The downside to the orcs is their economy requires more space, because you get more buildings per worker, you need more buildings per worker, and their defensive towers can't be upgraded. What ensued here was a battle that was non-stop pure chaos. The territory you hold is in the middle of the enemy's bases that are near the edges, meaning you're under threat from 3 sides for pretty much the whole battle. On the minimap, you can see the red "you're under attack" pings going off pretty much constantly, and I'm not even looking at most of them. No time for that. My mind was like, I know they're raiding and killing my workers, but I really don't have any headspace for worrying about such things right now. So we just watch as I get like 30 to 60 danger pings per minute while I try to find sectors and explore the map, and maybe even read some tooltips on our units and work out what they even are. I never did this latter thing in the end, so basically it's melee and archers, and that's about all the distinctions we'll need. Theoretically, you can analyze their cost and armor levels and resistance to damage types and come up with something clever, but if I was really clever, I wouldn't be receiving 30 to 60 "you are under attack" messages per minute, so let all hope of strategy fall by the wayside at this stage. My very orc-style ignore the problems and just attack mentality pays off, so there's some Ludo resonance for you. I secure a load of regions by taking out buildings with mostly just the heroes, and even kill one of the orc champions who was pretty much alone on the edge of his base. That causes that base to join you. We're still seeing attacks of varying sizes coming in from directions such as west, south, north and east, but all the other directions are going just fine. Here, we take on this large horde, giving up territory first and battling where I have a sector building and a tower to help out. It's not a pretty fight, and we're going to be losing most of our army here. However, playing as the orcs comes in useful, because I have basically 5 unit production buildings always queued up with more units to spit out, aka all the sector buildings, and then I can use the all units hotkey to quickly bring them to the point of the most dangerous action. That means, while we're taking huge losses in these battles, our pop level remains stable. We're getting more orcs out, like as fast as we're losing them, and ending the battles with a few guys left over, so over time that means we're getting stronger, especially if there's time to raid and maybe grab a sector in between big waves. And another thing to mention is the economy. Throughout my playthrough of the entire game, I found the economy to be quite generous. It's much more about unit micro this game. The economy runs itself, and very rarely was I not able to build something I needed due to a lack of resources. In fact, I have the opposite problem, which is resource floating. I don't have the micro to go around my recruitment buildings or tech buildings and actually spend the resources we have quickly. Meaning lots goes to waste sitting in my bank account instead of getting out there and doing something. I found myself wishing for a global recruitment pool where I could bring up a thing and just say, bring this set of units to this location, and the orders would distribute all around the relevant buildings for me. Basically, I never felt I had time to go around and set that up, since you're always in a fight and you need to micro, especially with the heroes. Or it's the rare chance to advance while there isn't a fight, and you need to watch over that and see what you can find. Again, it's a case of RTS player hates clicking the mouse and pressing buttons on the keyboard, but as I've said in other videos, RTSs give you so much to do that you can remove things to do and still have the player be fully engaged by doing the stuff they were just too busy for before, and maybe they'd even like it more. My old solution to this was to recruit a second person to sit at the PC with me and do some crazy four-hands approach to the micro or something. Maybe in the age of AI, we can get an AI assistant that I can tell to keep spending my resources on units and just send them to forward bases, then I'll pick them up and do stuff from there. That way I can focus on the wah and get the true orc experience, because I am myself a true orc. I did mention I'm an alien from the future, didn't I? Well, now you know what kind of alien. Something, something, something. I'm mad. Anyway, the cycle continues then. That being trying to explore the map a bit or take out an enemy building or two, and then usually either the main base or the base in the northwest gets swarmed with units, and I feel like I need to send the heroes back to deal with it. I generally was leaving units in these bases rather than advancing with them, so it's a bit less kitey than in the elf stage when this was also happening, and I was making better use of godstones now too, so it's not that much of a diversion in the end. There were just a lot of them, suffice to say. These small-scale attacks were pretty much constant, as we've seen, and these large groups came in every 1 to 2 minutes as I review the footage, so that same orcish ability to build from all sectors at once must really suit the AI, because they have the micro to really use that ability. They seemed to put new armies together really quickly, which makes sense, I guess, but they did have the sense to not always throw them away, withdrawing from attacks once they saw I had armies sitting around next to my sector buildings in some cases, so that avoids some of those many potential fights. You can tell I really wanted to make something work with these watchtowers in the capital sector. I needed some leeway to take units to the west to see what the question marks on the minimap are all about. If only I could get my capital defences strong enough to not worry about that for say 4 minutes, that might happen. But the orcs aren't the best for defending, so really this was barking up the wrong watchtower. Still, they do add health bars for the enemy to attack, and it's probably more health per resource than putting units out there, and they don't cost popcap. Meaning, as a pure delaying tactic, I guess it's worth doing this, but yes, I just lost and rebuilt my watchtower field all the time. One thing that finally reduced the pressure was taking the sectors in the top left, as they were defended only by a few units, meaning I could godstone heroes over there and make progress, before coming back and fighting over the splinters of my watchtowers back at the capital. This not only gives me more resources, but more importantly gives me population space so I can have bigger defending armies, generally stabilising the situation a bit more. And with resources, I guess it's not so much important that I get them, it's more important the enemy don't get them, so this should deny the extent to which they can spam things at me. The more ground I take, the more plausible it becomes that they will run out of stuff and have to rely on only the basic spammable units that cost food. Eventually I get a load of units together and go on the attack, taking out one more orc base and their champion to ease the pressure. You can see the tightness of the timing here. Had my attack lasted 5 seconds longer, I would struggle to get back to fend off this massive enemy attack. Fortunately, the AI has kindly attacked close enough to me that I can run over and kill them quickly. An attack like this from the east would be really cheeky right about now. 2 minutes later, they do attack my capital from the east. Luckily, it was only a small force, and I think they were just trying to run through in response to my attack up north, just some unfortunate pathfinding for the AI or something. It's sheer spamming from here. I need to use every ounce of momentum I can find, strategic momentum that is, meaning there is like a 20-second window in which the enemy won't respond as effectively because we killed a load of their units and they take time to rebuild, so that's when the magic happens, that magic being making a tiny amount of progress. And if we keep enough units alive, the next wave won't stop us either, and so we carry on. With most of the map under my control, a war of spamming units at each other will result in my victory eventually, so we're in the clear to some extent, but it's a lot of effort and time still if we're going to do things that way. There sure was still a lot of battling to come. It took over 40 minutes to advance only a small distance now, yet we're finally cutting a path into the last 2 or 3 enemy sectors. We're really fighting uphill, trying to swim up the tide and things like that. For one reason or another, the enemy did not run out of resources or stop making things really quickly during this grind. So yeah, perhaps cheats were at play, or as per my earlier speculation, it might just really take these timescales for resources to run out, even under continuous spending. What we're seeing here is the final battle, in which a big enemy army dies, but we have enough stuff left over to finally destroy a lot of their remaining buildings, meaning things are coming to a close, despite me losing virtually the entire assault force here and having to micro my heroes to avoid losing them too. This is what victory looks like, I assure you. We take out the final base after having to face only a smattering of remaining units, and our spammed blob of miscellaneous stuff does the job. I seemed to be lacking in siege weapons in this battle. I have no idea if you weren't allowed to build them, or maybe I just never found them in the menus because of my 2 hours of panicked gameplay. Well, it's just a relief to make it out. That's my main memory of lots of the RTS stages actually, especially the early ones. They're really intense and challenging stuff, at least compared to the vast majority of RTS campaigns I've played over the years, and it was always like a burst of happiness to just be like, well, it's over. This is that same thing I occasionally refer to, the Dark Souls Stockholm Syndrome, where if you watch somebody playing Dark Souls, they're having like an openly miserable time and they hate it, but if you ask them if they liked it afterwards, they will say yes, it was the best game I ever played. There's something strange going on here about miserable gaming experiences actually being good in certain circumstances. Anyway, there was a boss at the end where you had to fight the last Orc champion one-on-one using Gore. Well, I say one-on-one. You're allowed to summon zombies to the fight, which is great because we were going to lose without them. In fact, we'd have lost even with them, but I cheekily drank a health potion which just about allowed us to skim a victory there. The result is that Gore is made High Chief of all the tribes, and he'll bring the Orcs to fight with us if we like. However, I never used them for the rest of the game, so these hours of fighting and endless piles of bodies were probably all for nothing. Hooray! At least we got some experience points, and on that topic we need to finish exploring the map, killing the easy RPG tier enemies, and picking up all of the shiny misc in the corners, and with that the Orc mission is truly complete. And then it's on to the other optional mission, recruiting the humans. In my original memory of the game, this mission was really easy and much more enjoyable than the other two. It was designed differently and had a much more normal and gamey feel to how it played out. However, what actually happened was I completely wiped this mission from my memory and had replaced it with a memory from later in the game of just something else happening. So, let's just hope I blocked these memories from my mind because I had such a fun time, and take advantage of this handy video recording to see what really happened. We're on the same map from earlier when we fought the Orcs originally, but the Fog of War is back and there's new loot to find, so we need to explore like it's a new map, and of course I'll not be making the mistake of doing any quest objectives this time. The longer you can put off the battle, the more intel and resources you can gather. Therefore, we maraud around, killing the easy enemies and collecting shiny things once more. One of these shiny things was in this walled-off enclosure, and you see me here trying to summon some undead on the inside. However, the game is clever enough to stop you summoning units in places you aren't allowed to go, except sometimes it isn't, and I'll be doing some exploits using that in the latter half of the campaign, probably in the next part of this video. For now, I end up attacking the guards to get access, and this turns out to be what you were supposed to do. The objective right now is to free Clara from this very enclosure, Clara being the local mayor who helped us out earlier. So I guess I had to do this at some point, and have stumbled my way back onto the intended path. Clara says the Royal Army is rounding people up around here, probably because of us, since we very briefly became Baron of this village a while back, and General Geralt is on our trail for, well, us being wanted for murder and whatnot. He's oppressing the people here to get information. Our job is to clear out any royal soldiers and free the villagers they're holding captive, with the goal of eventually moving everyone to a city. You might note we have some orcs helping us do this, probably shocking the locals who were at war with the orcs only a few hours ago. These orcs join you when you come across them somewhere near the top of the map, and I wonder if that's caused by me doing the orc optional mission before this one, or was it because they were impressed at the earlier orc mission? The possibly Pandora's box of there being an optimal mission order in the game continues to edge open, but we can close it off pretty easily with the steadfast lock of not caring about it, and we carry on. Next, we need to escort the villagers off map. Loads of new enemies spawn on the route to ambush them, and this is a bit more of a problem than expected, because the refugee column runs pretty fast, and it doesn't tell you what route it's going to take. And if it sees enemies, the villagers will go and engage them in hand-to-hand combat. This makes your goal of keeping them alive difficult. Whereas if you simply went ahead of the column knowing the route, you could have easily defeated all the ambush parties with no trouble on your own. I think a couple of villagers died because of this, but most of them got out. Now, poor, naive, shell-shocked Devin was probably happy to see that this seems to conclude all our business on this map. I would have thought, hey, this mission is cutting me some slack. It plays out like an RPG quest, something a bit different, and we can get human allies here without hours of battling. No, the human optional mission chain is actually the longest and least optional feeling of these 3 allied army questlines, and we've got a long way to go. Cut to a few minutes later when the escort refugee mission takes us to a whole new map, with a resource panel active on the UI so we know there can be fights here, and we soon learn that a fight is indeed coming. It turns out the route to where the refugees are going heads right past this castle and its surroundings, which happens to be where Geralt and the Royal Army are encamped at the moment. If we were outlaws before, I don't know how we're going to look after this, but now we're going to start this full-on civil war. I say start, there's actually already one in the lore, as the Iskander nobles who fight the crown operate in this area, and that's going to help us out in a second. First, we have to go collect some herbs to save an ill villager. The most generic possible RPG quest of all time, basically, but it turns out to lead into something more interesting. We run into Bertrand, our old archer friend, who since getting caught up in all those treason shenanigans because of us, has become a priest. Lycain lets people off the executioner's block if they agree to join his purity brigade, as you might recall, and Bertrand not only took the deal, but appears to honestly be a member of this religion. You meet him a load of times throughout the game, and he's always trying to get you to join him. But Tahar, while not particularly non-religious or anything, doesn't really like the church or doesn't identify with it, and Ultra doesn't like the new purity cult version of the church, which is now the main thing as of recently. So he doesn't consider the possibility of joining or that the church might be right about all this stuff or anything for a moment, which I bring up because in a fantasy world where magic is very evidently a thing, it's much harder to dismiss things like holy visions and prophecies and missions from God, because those things do actually happen. Maybe God really will come back if we kill all the elves and such. Sorry, Iria. You know, Iana, she can turn into 3 people, so it was never going to work between us. Anyway, I guess if the game had, infinite budget, they could have made a light side and dark side route through the game where, you can side with the purity and help with all the genocide if your character thinks the ends will justify the means. And then what I want them to do there would be throw in the Dark Souls-esque good-bad ending where you really do resummon God and create a paradise the purity was right all along, but it's only a paradise now for the limited few people who lived. And as soon as something goes wrong, those survivors turn to the tried and tested answer to regain God's favor, and they start finding excuses to kill each other again until humanity is so pure that it practically goes extinct. And then in the end, when the only ones left alive are you and God decides he'll start a new world, he'll start over, and he'll bring you into the new world as a new god, as a reward for surviving. However, as a god, you are actually a slug. Spoilers, by the way, for all of these Soulsborne, quote-unquote good ending plots. While I was dreaming, Geralt and company come and arrest us. So that's a bother, but this doesn't last very long because the local rebels, these Iskander nobles, end up attacking our party and setting us free, although Geralt escapes to be a boss battle for another day. After the rebels rescue us, we go over to their camp and speak with their commander. Whoops, yes, I've done it again. I was doing the quest without exploring the whole map first, and I'm quickly punished by suddenly being placed in command of the rebellion, thanks to that commander's aura we seem to give off. Everyone wants the Royal Army out of here, and we've now got a whole load of rebels we can sacrifice to make it happen. And killing rebels is what the Royal Army wants, so it seems this is a nice compromise where everyone gets something. I do suffer a little from not having fully uncovered the map, but overall I've got most sectors marked, and a load of godstones unlocked. So we get to work. I still didn't really have a build order down. I knew that getting wood early on was generally useful, and with humans you also need stone early on. Yes, it is different for each of the factions. And having played as each one approximately once, I still didn't have any bright ideas. I also had various incorrect assumptions about how the economy worked, which was causing me all kinds of problems, and I'll bore you with a bit of that in a minute. First, note I'm not playing very well in terms of the all-important opening minute. The biggest problem with my gameplay is that I move all the heroes together. Only heroes can take territory, but you have 4, so on a map like this, where most of the map is neutral, and I've cleaned out the enemies already, I could quite easily be gaining territory at 4 times the rate. That's the kind of thing that the whole difficulty of the stage will hinge upon. So just in the footage we've seen already, the big mistakes have been made, or big opportunities missed perhaps. That said, I was able to secure at least 2/3 of the map even with this slow method. The issue now is that my territory extends all the way around the enemy sectors, and there's no good place to defend. All my territory is at risk all the time. And indeed, this quickly turned into another Omni battle, where the enemy would raid 2 or 3 sectors at the same time in different areas of the map. And I couldn't really respond. This led me to losing the bottom half of the map over the next 10 minutes. So while we see some of that struggle, I'll tell you about one problem that's hampering my situation: negative resources. You might guess this is an issue, but it's a bigger issue than I thought, and I only realised why much later in the game. The game happily allows you to spend resources you don't have, and this puts you into debt. This then locks up potentially anything using that resource until the debt is cleared, but you likely won't notice that or see the details. The way the economy works is that when you buy something, some guys spawn at your capital or sector outposts and carry resources to the relevant place, i.e. to a building site or a unit training building, and, well, this already opens up a huge web of questions about the specifics of building placement and the paths between them actually mattering way more than even in an Age of Empires style proximity to gather points sense. But we'll just have to ignore that. The problem is that when you have negative resources, there can be several of these carrier workers waiting to deliver the same resource to different places, and as far as I know, there isn't any way to prioritize which jobs are done first. That can result in all jobs being done last, if you get my meaning. A simple example is, if you have 20 wood needed for a building and a barracks asking for 20 wood for a catapult or something, and that puts you at minus 40 wood in the bank. As wood gradually comes in, your carriers are randomly bringing units of say 4 wood at a time to each project. Assuming delivery is random and it's just, on average, picking one or the other each time, only the 9th and 10th deliveries will allow both builds to finally begin right at the end. But if you already have 40 wood, then both projects get the carriers taking all of the stuff to them as quickly as possible, meaning that both can start after only 5 deliveries, and the deliveries were way faster and weren't contingent on a delivery of wood from a lumber mill somewhere else on the map. It's a double whammy that speeds up production by like an order of magnitude, or to put it more accurately, going into debt slows production by an order of magnitude, and that's more likely to happen the further in debt you are. And it becomes a big problem when you do what I was trying to do to handle this issue, building stuff. The clearest example is if you want wood, you make a woodcutter, but if you're already in wood debt, adding a woodcutter makes the debt worse and slows down all wood building. And because you usually have several woodcutters all queued in different sectors at the same time, if you react to your debt by just queuing more, the entire queue is slowed down, lengthening the time until more wood comes in, and there's a bit of a downward spiral that only resolves if you leave it alone for a while. But that's time in which you aren't upgrading your sector buildings because they also require wood. That means you aren't generating new workers, which means you aren't going to be getting more resources or more unit production, and you end up in the situation I was facing, where the enemy are harshly attacking in 2 or 3 front pushes, and I was only just holding them back, gradually losing ground and losing most of the units I was able to make. I think I was assuming back then that everything was just built in the order you asked for it, so there was an invisible build queue, like a global build queue somewhere. So if I put a new building down, no extra resources would go to it until everything else was done, which is the more efficient way of it happening. But it happens the other way, in the least efficient way, I think, anyway. I still don't quite know. Well, my other issue is just lack of micro, of course. I do have workers and resources eventually to get another barracks or two down, but it took me ages to actually do that because of the constant action. And soon resources aren't even a problem, I've got loads, but my lack of map control means the enemy's superior remembering to make units skills keeps me very much under pressure, and things eventually fall apart when I lose my heroes in a messy battle. You can game over pretty quickly with only 2 lives, especially if you're constantly seeing if you can get away with doing something else during fights other than microing the heroes. So that was that, we failed big time, and once again the enemy had me on the ropes pretty consistently throughout the fight. I had hopes of defending, but not of attacking, and that's no good if you don't already control most of the map or most of the resources. We need to up our game for the next attempt. The main thing I did differently now was the hero splitting I mentioned. We can take territory much faster this way. However, owned territory doesn't do anything if you don't build in it, and you need resources to build. Because I didn't know about these problems from the debts, all I did was queue up millions of sector upgrades to get workers, and then sat there in a mountain of debt, very slowly building up, and perhaps this is when I began to realize how much slower it is to do it this way. This probably counters the advantage of claiming territory early. Well, we've all got to learn somehow, I guess. One thing I didn't realize, by the way, is that you can make buildings without workers. I thought you needed at least 1 free worker to make a building, but you can also put down an entire sector's economy, even with no workers present, as the builder and carrier workers just appear magically. And while the buildings won't do anything, as regular workers spawn over time, they'll get to work instantly if there are free slots, and this avoids any idle time, and it's just another optimization that will have to come into play much later. Perhaps you'll see me doing that in a later stage in the next part somewhere. Here's the crucial part of this mission. Our bases in the far west and east extremes of our big arc of territory took all of the enemy attacks this time. In the previous attempt, they came up the middle a load as well, for whatever reason, despite having a very open defensive line. We managed to concentrate all the fighting in 2 places. In the west was a bridge that I could spam towers and crossbows to defend, and in the east there was this little dell forming a kind of crossroads, in which I could also place towers and place my heroes. This is the key to the game that I eventually came to appreciate. You need to be able to fend off enemy attacks with just your heroes and sheer micro. And because recently our hero party has got a fair bit stronger, it's more in the realm of possibility now. Because it's not just actually our heroes, is it? It's our heroes plus the infinite number of zombies and additional Ianas that I can summon. And as I mentioned before, these summons are so cheap that you never need to go without them, even if you're also casting a load of other things. With this, I'm able to dedicate most of my PopCap to the west side of the map, while the east is held by only a few non-PopCap using units and summons. From here it takes only 5 minutes to get a massive army together, which then pushes across that bridge in the west, and gets started working on the key sector of this map. Not that I really knew this, but a lot of the enemy's territory in the lower left is set up such that it's choke pointed through this area just southeast of the bridge, so capturing this area and the sector east of it to close off the gates to the big castle will secure the entire map for us. Here's the winning moment essentially, a massive spam battle on the field north of the castle. Both sides are going at it all over the place, and all I'm trying to do is send more and more units to get in there and help as soon as they're made. I've also focused on crossbowmen to get that high DPS and low micro requirement via the attack move AI being good at using them, or less bad compared to using melee units. I kept using the all units hotkey to get new recruits to come down here, although sometimes that means pathing through other enemy sectors, causing minor kerfuffles that probably looked very deliberate and tactical from the enemy's perspective, so that's nice. The winning part of this winning moment is that we won the brawl. We drove the enemy back and back until they were at this bridge over the moat into their castle, at which point their army split, with some staying outside to die, and the rest fleeing back in. I am bogged down a bit here by the fact my crossbow spam isn't very good against all the buildings, so it's going to take me a long time to secure this territory. However, this time, We aren't facing orcs who can bounce back immediately, and even increasing the time between waves from like 2 minutes to 5 minutes is enough to allow this not very siege damage based army to knock all of their buildings down by chipping away at them atom by atom via crossbow impacts against the stone, and after launching the entire Amazon rainforest at the enemy buildings, we can make a little progress. And now we're in the phase where I have a death ball, so I can just gradually clear up the rest of the map easily enough. After a mere 10 minutes of further advance, we're right up in the enemy base. For some reason I still refused to bring any catapults for this attack. I likely did notice I could use them, but because we're pop-capped, and we aren't losing enough units, the production queues aren't going through, and hence we just don't get any new units out. You can clear the queues and delete your existing units to force something to come out right away, but it's easier to just watch this absolute mess unfold as a billion crossbowmen try to fight in the extremely tight confines of the enemy base. Probably the worst situation for crossbow spam, but it's still working, so there you have it. The only other thing we need to be careful about is that, even in these one-sided fights, you can still game over due to hero loss really easily. If the enemy buildings target a hero, they will die fast, and that's mainly a problem for Iskrim, since he is a melee character and he stands right below the enemy towers and sector buildings. I think Iana went and died at some point in the same way as well. The answer is not to use heroes for attacking buildings, that's pretty safe, but later we'll see that actually with a little tweaking, heroes will make attacks like this one way easier if you really pay attention to what they can do. For now, just spamming zombies and Ianas into the mix will do for us. We win this battle, but actually you didn't even have to do this. The goal of the quest was to move the refugees from the bottom right corner to the top, and really, you only needed to secure enough of the map to make that happen. You get an achievement if you bother to clear the entire map, so that's something, but at the time I probably thought that you had to. By the way, General Geralt is said to have already escaped the fort by the time you attack, so no showdown with him for now. Instead, we get to escorting the refugees once again. However, there'll be no ambushes this time, since we accidentally conquered this region for the Iskander Rebellion, and while they're probably just as bad as the existing royal family, they are at least kind enough to let us walk by without paying a toll or anything. You might think that's scant reward, and that the reward is going to be that they will agree to ally with us, thus securing us a human army. But no, this battle here was all a massive sideshow. The real human force you need to ally with for this quest is an entirely different one, found on the next map the quest takes us to, the city of Everlight. Everlight is a great place, and here's why. You don't have to fight another battle. Actually, I noticed the battle resources UI is here on this map, and I had this theory that it disappears on maps where you don't have to fight, or you can't fight. Maybe I was lying about that, or maybe there was once a battle here in some point in development or the previous version of the game or something. It's certainly a big enough and cool enough map for a really interesting battle. For now though, I can breathe a sigh of relief and get back to some trivially easy RPG questing as we make our way towards this new city. At least that last battle wasn't the massive grind that the elf and orc ones turned into. Perhaps because I'm finally gaining the skills that one should probably have already before playing on hard difficulty. It's a strange situation because I think the battles in this game are very well done, especially with the AI quality, and I like the RTS systems they have, yet I also dreaded actually doing them, and was happy for them to be over so I could get back to the chill RPG side of things. I guess I just actually want to play Baldur's Gate or something. It's nice to wander around and listen to the nice music and fight battles now and again with little bursts of micro, compared to the constant barrage of micro and decisions and constantly feeling like 1 second of delay could cost you the entire match 40 minutes down the line that comes from the more intense RTS side of the game. As ever, I remain the most hates RTS fan. I'm the equivalent of the Star Wars fan that hates Star Wars phenomenon in the world of movies, or more accurately, I guess, the thing I mentioned before, the Soulsborne fan that constantly complains and moans like a toddler about every enemy placement and hitbox. It's constant wah about everything. Every bump in the road, they're like, this game sucks, they hate it. And then they'll turn around and say, this is a masterpiece, it's the perfect game, once they actually aren't experiencing it, basically. I think some of us hate because we love, something like that, and maybe the hate, I don't know, should just be ignored, basically. Everlight is a really nice map with a populous and detailed city to walk around. It's got quite a carefully made feel to it, like some parts look older than others, and it's got this really authentic feeling depiction of a late medieval city. Yes, I am a time traveller, and I know exactly what a late medieval Central European city should look like. You can do all kinds of little side quests and jovial antics and fight the bandits who live in the sewers, just straight up RPG stuff. But here's what all this stuff was actually about in the end. You visit the mayor to confirm it's all good for Clara to bring her population to live here, and apparently she's good friends with the mayor, so the deal is done. We still don't have our human army, but that is solved when a new character steps out of a side door to give us an army. There is a sigh of disbelief as this new guy apparently knows Tahar quite well. However, in my clicking enthusiasm, I think I accidentally skipped over the text box where they explained to the mayor just how they know each other, meaning I now don't know the deal either. It's someone from our past, and in the depths of my mind I want to say it might even be one of Tahar's family members. Although they aren't on good terms, it's someone who was involved in the Mage Rebellion business in some way on one side or the other. And you know what? That's all we really need for this guy's deal, because while he does join the party as a main character, I never saw him again. I think he stands around in Mulhandir for the rest of the game if you never select him, similar to that demon summoner guy from earlier. But he probably stands in a part I didn't really go to or something, because that's pretty much the end of his role in the plot. Don't worry about it. The relevant factor is that he is the leader of a mercenary army, and the mayor agrees to reward you by paying all of their costs for them to come on our quest to find the things, to activate the thing, which might do something to solve that thing. A quest which has been largely forgotten for the last several hours of gameplay because of the sheer length and intensity of these optional missions. It surprises me that Everlight, which is such a cool and content-filled place, is reached via this optional mission, and it's really optional as well. It's not like the game encourages you to do all three of the army recruitment missions. It tells you to do one, and then explicitly says the other two are optional, and you never need them mechanically in the game. Like, the entire game is based around the idea that you have one army, so having three does not present any advantage whatsoever. So it's extra weird how good the optional content is. I guess for some people this was the main content, in that they did this and skipped the elf part, for example. Well, I was surprised at how good it is and how non-mandatory the good stuff they made is. They probably should have forced you to see more stuff so you thought the game was better, that sort of thing. I think the game might direct you to come here later for some other reason, although I don't remember if that's a side quest at this stage. Well, my complaint here is the game is too good. That's my complaint. You made it too good, and now I'm mad at you. Well, we go back to adventuring for a while. Here was a quest with an example of speech not mattering very much. You talk to this mass murdering guy and have loads of options to try and get him to explain his deal to you. However, if you do go through all the dialogue trees, it just ends with a fight, an option you had from the beginning, and the plot of the side quest isn't changed by you trying to talk it out. So yes, just optional dialogue remains for your own amusement rather than having a role-playing role in the game. A disappointment, but I was far beyond expecting something more than that. I wouldn't even say the game needs something like that. I only expected it right at the start. Then I just suspended my disbelief out of sympathy for how annoying it would be to develop a game that is this large in such a way that the specifics of your dialogue choices change the gameplay or the main plot in the way that some other games do attempt. If they got lots of money for Spellforce 4, perhaps that's an idea, although at this stage, I'm asking them to basically make a Witcher 3 tier RPG that is also a good strategy game. And maybe that's a big ask. Let's just ask for it anyway. Back to questing. You can go to Wizard College on a nearby island and recruit another party member via a quest that involves clearing a classic RPG dungeon. This other party member is another one I didn't use in quests, but I vaguely remember talking to this guy a bunch. And I think his deal is something similar to what I touched upon earlier, that he's a certified neurodivergent who talks about how he doesn't really understand people or feel similar to them. And this leads him to becoming a magic nerd on an island. And I can sympathize and be jealous of that. He probably has a tragic backstory with his ex. I'll see if he mentions it later in the footage. For now, we're facing this optional dungeon with even more optional bosses inside. I did well killing another of the summonable boss encounters in here. And then I did less well trying to deal with a pit of wyverns you can find. It's ultra optional in that you can safely walk right past and still do the optional side quests. but I still wanted to steal the things lying on the floor inside this pit. So I ended up spending a while summoning Ianas and zombies as distractions, and then trying to quickly loot everything and kill the smaller wyverns and get back out without losing 2 lives, basically. I even had a go at actually winning the fight, but it seems we were nowhere close. You can come back later and do this at a higher level with more abilities. However, I completely forgot about it after this, so I guess this wyvern gets to live. Now, what we'll do here is bring things to a close for this part. With any luck, I can fit the rest of the game into the next part, and that might be a big ask, as there was much more game left after this than I expected. We'll get to the part I was certain was the end of the game, and then stumble into another act after that, with loads more quests and battles still to come. However, the next part of the game contains the battles that are easier and more gamey, including ones where the AI is more scripted, and ones where my understanding of the heroes and RTS mechanics leads to much more satisfying, but still epically chaotic, massive grinding mega fights. So come and join me in the next part at some point, where we meet a talking dragon, deal with an ancient tribe's civil war with a serpentine twist, fight the infinite legions of the Lord of Death's apocalypse, and then realise all that is rather tangential to the main quest, in which I should probably find out what the deal is with that song that kills you, and perhaps solve it at some point. Did I mention there's a talking dragon? This world is full of stuff and content to explore, and I'm outraged by it. So let's see some more of it and hear some more of me complaining about it in the next part.